first speaker, Kamales Lardi, who is going to share with us her thoughts. Technology is not a silver bullet solution. A clear value proposition should drive any transformation effort. This is your quote, Kamales. This approach resonates well with many business leaders and has helped Kamales stand out in the digital space. Kamales is a bold and strategic thinker in the digital and business transformation with over 20 years of experience in the digital space with dynamic and current approaches to technology application in the business. Now listen to that. Back in 1999, Kamales was turned down at her first interview as a technological assistant. And why? Because the interviewer meant that this job may be too technical for a woman. These days, recently, Kamales has been awarded to one of the top 10 global thinkers and leaders in digital transformation. Kamales, it's my great honor to have you as our opening keynote speaker. The virtual stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Dalit. It's great to be here today, and good afternoon. Hello to everyone. I have a happy ending to that story, though, because at the end, I did end up getting hired into the company in a different department, and I did end up doing all of the technology projects as well. So at the end of my stint there, the CIO apologized to me for making that assumption. So it was a happy ending. So let me jump right in. Artificial intelligence as an industry is not new. It has been around since the early 50s, and as an industry, it's probably as old as computing itself, as the history of computing itself. And we're surrounded on a daily basis by real tangible AI applications in our daily lives. About 77% of consumers use on a daily basis some form of AI-based services or devices. So if you think about Siri on your iPhone, or even Alexa, or if you think about those movie recommendations you get from Netflix, or those targeted ads that you see on Facebook, these are all examples of AI-based systems. Now, the interest, or over the last decade or so, the waves of interest and decline in AI as an industry has really been enabled or even hindered by the funding behind the industry. So we had a significant wave in the 50s to the 70s in terms of interest in the industry. And this was really driven by government investments into the AI research and development to push the industry forward. However, back then, the AI solutions that were developed were unable to, basically they overpromised and they were unable to deliver on those promises. And so the funding dried up. Now, if we talk about the second wave of interest that we've seen in investments around the field of artificial intelligence, that happened around the late 1980s. And here we saw more investments coming in from corporates as well as venture capitals as well. The interest here was more focused around expert systems and artificial intelligence being used for automation. However, back then in the 80s, data storage and management was incredibly expensive, and the interest in this space declined because based on these high expenses, they were not able to deliver on the AI solutions that were promised either. So funding dried up again. Now, recently, we've seen over the last couple of years, interest and investments into AI really increasing significantly as well. And the AI industry as a whole has really gone global. And we are in a situation at the moment that is really prime and suited. We have prime conditions for artificial intelligence development. We've got unlimited storage capacity, cloud computing, experience and expertise in terms of utilizing and analyzing big data, as well as significant advancements in deep learning capabilities. And so what we're seeing is an environment that's really primed to accelerate research and development in the AI space. And so investments have also increased, and it's diversified investments really coming in from the corporates, from venture capitals, as well as governments and academia. Now, in terms of VC funding or venture capital funding, we're really seeing this shift away from science fiction perspectives of what AI could deliver into real kind of mundane applications that have a real transformative impact in the AI industry. And we're seeing 2019 was actually the big year for AI investments, where there was about 22.7 billion in investments in globally in that space, and that was about a 22% increase from the previous year. And in 2020, that has not slowed down. So between January and July of 2020, we saw about 8.2 billion in funds raised for AI-based solutions. And so despite the coronavirus pandemic hitting, the investments in the space have not really slowed down. Now, if we talk about government investments, this has also continued significantly to impact the market. So we are seeing billions of dollars being allocated on a national level for AI funding in terms of research and development in countries like France, US, UK, Canada, as well as India, China, and even in Israel. So the government interest in this space has definitely increased. And in terms of enterprise investments or corporate investments, we are really seeing a significant increase there as well. What we're seeing is corporates really looking to double the spending, or globally, there's potentially or estimated double in terms of spending for AI type solutions, from 50 billion at the moment to about 110 billion potentially by 2024. Now, companies are not actually investing in AI solutions because they can. They're doing so because they really have to in order to stay competitive in the global digital economy. And a lot of companies are looking to AI solutions as well to trigger or to counter the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic. So AI systems or AI tools basically are able to analyze large amounts of data in order to detect patterns in that information and detect really key insights. And this helps those systems to make complex decisions, to predict human behavior, or even to recognize text or recognize human speech or images, among other things, of course. So basically what it is these AI-based systems are able to adapt, learn, and improve itself. And these capabilities are really invaluable when you think about organizations that are trying to confront and adapt to the significant changes that have been created during the coronavirus pandemic over the last 8 or 9 months. As companies start to look towards, recovery or survival and entering into a new normal environment, they're looking to invest further into AI-based solutions to help them in that recovery process. So if we take a simple example, the global pandemic has really drastically changed the way or drastically had an impact on consumption patterns globally. People have shifted towards more digital and e-commerce type interactions and acquisitions. So as these consumption patterns change, companies are really struggling to understand. They're not able to use historical data and past experiences to create these new environments or new revenues for business. So they're turning towards AI-based systems to really help them detect new consumption patterns. How are people behaving in these new environments? And utilize these insights in order to create hyper-personalized products and services, as well as to try and define new ways to engage and interact with these consumers on new digital platforms. And so I believe, though, there are huge opportunities in the area of AI, not just for corporations, but across the globe in terms of applications for society as a whole. And I believe one of the biggest or key opportunities is not just in AI systems being applied, but really in the combination of emerging technologies being applied together. So for example, taking the kind of trusted data environment provided by blockchain technology and combining that with the ability of AI systems to analyze large amounts of data, we can really create some very transformative solutions that could impact industries as well as the global market and society as a whole. The same could be seen in terms of AI applications with Internet of Things sensors, where we are able to gain access to large amounts of data at a very granular level and utilize AI systems to analyze that data for key insights. Now, despite these big opportunities in AI systems, there are still big challenges to address this as well. In order to apply or to implement AI systems effectively, we need access to large amounts of high quality data in order to train the systems and build something that's able to produce outputs that can be utilized. Another key challenge is really having the expertise and people with key expertise and capabilities in order to build these systems as well. So what we're seeing is huge opportunities, but there's still some barriers before organizations and companies or people as a whole can start using these systems more effectively. So to conclude, what I would say is I believe that investments in the artificial intelligence industry as a whole will really depend on the beliefs or will be driven by beliefs of investors on whether these AI systems can really create solutions that are impactful or transformative across industries and markets. And what we've seen in recent years are developments in AI really accelerating towards generating new revenue potential, hyper-personalized products and services, deeper engagement with consumers across various channels, as well as opportunities to reduce costs and create efficiencies in business processes. So opportunity-wise, there's really a lot of opportunity in the AI industry. However, I believe that there are some key challenges to be addressed. But wherever there's opportunity, there's definitely potential for investment, and that's where the investors will go. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kamales, for these great insights. To the audience, feel free to put your questions into the chat that we have. We will be more than happy to answer them. And by the way, you have the possibility to get in touch in a one-to-one with Kamales, or also go into the backstage after the speech where you can discuss with Kamales further. There is one question that came in. You talked about the beliefs that we need to have to also be able to invest and take obviously certain risks. Where do you see the main obstacles? Why companies or investors do not invest?
I think one of the main obstacles that I've seen, so I can address this from two sides. One is in terms of investors or VCs. I've seen several venture capital companies and investors who really are wary of AI when it comes to investment, simply because there has been a hype over the last couple of years where companies are putting the words AI into pretty much everything that they're developing, not necessarily really delivering on AI solutions. And so the market has become a little bit hyped in that sense. And I think in this case, investors might be a little bit wary. On the corporate side, as the second section, what we could see is leadership teams really going one of two ways, becoming really wary of AI systems, thinking that it's something so complicated or complex that they would not be able to understand it and hence shying away from it. Or on the other hand, thinking that it's a silver bullet solution, as you mentioned that quote earlier, the one thing that could resolve all of the business. And so this really puts them in a bad position to invest in something like a AI-based system or AI-powered system. So I think in this sense, really having a good understanding for what the solutions are, and here advice we give to companies or even to people looking to invest, look for the underlying use case, look for the value that it's going to create in the market, the problems that they're trying to solve, look for the team, the layout of the team. So are there people in there who are really data scientists, people who have real capabilities in AI systems, as well as look for systems that are being built. If you're looking to invest in a startup, look for real systems that can build and utilize.
Great. Thanks a lot, Kamales. And we will have you later on our panel. So we will see you on the virtual stage again. With that, most welcome. With that, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to our first panel in this session. Chair of the panel is Simon Greenman. Simon is co-founder and partner at Best Practice AI, where he advises corporates, startups, and investors on best practice in AI strategy, implementation, risk, and governance. He is a member of the World Economic Forum Council for AI and has over 20 years of international and digital transformation experience in innovation leadership. Simon chairs the Harvard Business School Alumni Angels of London and is an AI, EIR, and Seed Camp and advisor at DN Capital. With him on the panel, we have Jacques Ludic. Jacques Ludic is actually the first PhD in AI in the African continent. Although I know you already quite for a while, Jacques, I didn't know that. This is really cool. He's a smart technology entrepreneur, AI expert, founder of multiple AI companies, author, AI ecosystem builder, and award-winning AI leader with over 25 years experience in AI and data science in its application. He's the founder of the first AI company on the African continent that has been sold to GE, a multinational company. Also currently, he's writing on his book about transformative human-centric AI, what is definitely also a very, very important topic around AI. Jacques' massive transformative purpose is to help shape a better future in smart technology area, and especially to help business and society thrive and to help transforming Africa. By the way, we had Jacques Ludic's son last weekend on a panel, and that was amazing. So I hope he's now listening to you as you were listening to him last week. So we have a lot of really young AI enthusiasts you won't believe. We're going to bring them on stage again. With Jacques, we have also Ngozi Bell, who actually also had a son on our stage last week. She conducted research on spectral analysis and deep sea communication funded by the US Navy and has more than 25 years of industry experience, from environmental engineering to semiconductor engineering, from telecommunication to venture capital, from the public sector to private equity to entrepreneurship, spanning 4 continents and cumulative of over 1.5 billion business oversight. She has also been in academia teaching physics and management and was appointed to the administration of President Obama, working with small businesses. Thanks for being with us, and I hope Okezue is also watching you being on the panel. Then we have Dima Aliaha, and she is a tech pioneer. At Microsoft, she was appointed to the first Saudi female to be assigned as an executive director leading developer experience and digital innovation. She was consultant for various governmental and private organizations in the fields of innovation and digital economy, along leading Saudi's national digital transformation strategy. With a commitment to support Saudi female, Dima has managed to launch and lead several initiatives that focus on enabling women in the IT industry and enhancing their skills to meet the highest standards of the Saudi labor market. With that, she established WomenSpark initiative, and I'm so happy to have you with us on stage, and I hope that all these women are also following you on the panel. So, I'll be happy to hand over to you, Simon. Simon, our chair of this great intercontinental panel. The stage is yours.
Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here, especially with such an esteemed group of panelists. One of the privileges of sitting on the World Economic Forum's Global AI Council is we think about AI from a global perspective and take action at global perspective. But so much of the narrative around AI is really dominated by two countries, the US and China. The US is seen very much as the R&D hub of the world, but with a good financial investment ecosystem can help build big tech companies like Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, all of these global sort of AI powerhouses. And contrast that with China, where it's seen as a sort of applied AI powerhouse with its massive market of 1.4 billion people, its massive data sets, for example, 1 billion people a month doing mobile payments on WeChat and WeChat, then it has this massive potential at scale. And you see applications apply to areas like surveillance, about marketing, legal, technology, education. So China becomes a real scale. And then occasionally sort of Europe's mentioned in these conversations, and with Europe much more of a focus on individual rights of privacy and ethics. So it's a real pleasure actually today to have more of an inclusive conversation where we can talk and look at other geographies. And not only that, is AI is dominated typically by a male voice to have much more of an inclusive gender on this panel. So I'm delighted to introduce our panelists here. And really the key question we're going to look at is why invest in the ecosystems of particular countries or regions? And ecosystems are made up of sort of government, AI policies, the regulatory policies, skills, funding, data, the demand from corporates, and all of those ecosystems together make for an interesting country or region to invest in. So we're going to explore really the question of why we should be consider investing in individual countries. So absolute pleasure to kick off here, and I'm looking forward to learning from the panelists. And I'd really like to start with Dima for a couple of minutes. Just briefly talk about the ecosystem in the Saudi and the Middle East, and also your role. You've started some very interesting groups here, in particular the WomenSpark. So what is your role in the local AI ecosystem?
Well, thank you so much, Simon. It's a privilege and a great opportunity to be part of this esteeming panel. Proud to be here to talk about Saudi Arabia specifically, and also the region as well, as we see a huge transformation these days in the region, especially the acknowledgement of digital transformation and how determined the governments and the countries are to leapfrog and be ahead of the curve when it comes to digital transformation. And why is that? Is because of the resources that that region has, which is the Middle East. So when we look at the talents, for instance, we see that great tech-savvy young populations in Saudi, let alone in Saudi, 75% of our population is under the age of 35 and very tech-savvy. So we are consumers and not producers to technology. And this is what the governments are trying to change, and private sector and also the NGOs, where they are working together, moving from a egocentric approach to an ecocentric approach to create that ecosystem of development and manufacturing of technologies. That's when it comes to the population. When it comes, and also when we talk about consumption, as Saudi, we are the first worldwide when it comes to YouTube consumption, when it comes to Twitter, and also when it comes to Snapchat. So therefore, we are very close to technology. The adoption of using technology is very high in the region. And also when it comes to digital literacy, we see that most of the the curriculums and education systems are digitally infused. And now when we look at geographically, a very strategic location connecting Asia with Europe and Africa. And when we look at legacy, it's very easy to transform. And why? Because we have a green field and there is no legacy that is a barrier for us to transform very quickly. Therefore, I see that, and also when it comes to the fourth thing is economically, Saudi alone is part of the G20, which is a G20 country determined to diversify its economy with the Vision 2030, and digital economy is a big portion of that aspiration, where personally I expect that digital economy will increase its value in the GDP by 2030 by 60%. So these all these reasons create that environment and create that ecosystem that makes it very attractive for innovation, especially in AI and new advanced technologies, and also for investors, where they would meet the talent with the infrastructure and also the opportunity all at the same time.
Thank you. And over to you, Jack. I mean, you started the Machine Intelligence Institute of Africa, so you're based in South Africa, but looking much more globally across the continent. Can you talk about the local and the regional ecosystem for AI and your role in it, that you play in that?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Yeah, I think first of all, we're starting with Mia as well. Obviously, just maybe before I start with Mia, I think obviously I do have a career in AI, and for me, I sold my first AI company, General Electric, as Dalip mentioned, but I also wanted to plow back. And a few years ago, there was almost like not a lot going on the African continent. If I just go back to probably 2015, we didn't have any AI conferences, and there was nothing really happening. It was almost like this AI company that I sold was kind of the first AI company, at least it was showing some activity. But during the last decade, I would say last 5, 6, 7 years, I could see a pickup on terms of entrepreneurial activity, and it kind of opened up. And so I decided to also plow back, start an AI ecosystem here in Africa. And it all started when I founded MIA as a Machine Intelligence Institute of Africa to build AI community. There was also like-minded individuals in other countries, like for instance, Baye Andankanbi, he's the Chief Transformation Officer of MTN in Nigeria, and he had a whole vision around creating AI, a data science community there. So we started collaborating, and I started to help and to bring the AI, connecting the South African and Nigerian AI communities as well. And from there, things started to roll and increase. But I'm also an entrepreneur, so we want to set an example. So I did set an example with Ceasing Systems, my first AI company. So I founded another company called Cortex Logic, which is now part of the Cortex Group, as an AI engine, as a next generation AI engine for business. And so we're currently busy with that, helping to transform Africa, very much busy in helping enterprises thrive in this new era. And so this is obviously also part of the massive transformative purpose as well. And what I also found myself in, because I've started MIA and I've been involved, and I also got the opportunity to engage with various organizations in Europe as well, the AI for Good Global Summit, also the European Union dialogue with South Africa on AI. There's also national AI dialogues, so which is very, very exciting, and there's a lot to learn. So we wanted to obviously interact with thought leaders internationally and make sure that we can facilitate discussions locally as well. So the last few years has been amazing in terms of open data discussions around lethal autonomous weapons and the future of life, and talking about these kind of things on the African stage as well. Very much, very key and interested to see what we can do on that front as well. but it's still early days. I think when we actually get to the strategy, where I will talk a little bit more about what we actually do from a MEA perspective, there's some other exciting initiatives as well.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. And Ngozi, you're based in Pennsylvania in the US, but lead a lot of investment in sub-Saharan Africa. So what do you see in terms of the sort of the investment landscape and ecosystem of where you're directing your investments from your PE shop?
Yeah, so thank you so much, Simon. It's really nice to be on the panel. So I'd like to talk about it a little bit from the US perspective, and also sort of look at what we're doing from an ecosystem focused perspective. So the first thing I say is, what is the US's strategy around artificial intelligence, and how is the US approaching artificial intelligence, and why is that critically important? And I think that one of the things that we have to look is that the US has a tried and true strategy, and that strategy has been used time and time again. It's basically invest in early stage cutting edge R&D, create a connected stakeholder relationship that involves the government, interaction to the private sector, to the public, to academia, and also to like-minded international partners. The second thing is to really provide the support that allows the private sector access to tools and also able to invest. What I like is that they have put 5 pillars around this, because it really creates a sort of a boundary for you as an investor to have a bird's eye view of where resources are already available for investments. So for example, the government is investing in very early stage AI R&D in very specific target areas. The second thing is that it's unleashing its resources to allow for American innovation. So that means that there's an ecosystem play that we as investors can tap into right away. The other thing is really around regulations. And when regulations are not necessarily bad, but it is necessary that regulations take into consideration the ecosystem or the investors that are in that resources are accessible to investors is extremely important, and that barriers don't stifle the innovation of small businesses or startups. The other thing is to train an AI-ready workforce. So the government is working on a number of initiatives that really trains an AI-ready workforce in STEM, as well as in industry, vocationally, as well as workforce development. So creating that pipeline that allows you have the resources to tap into. And then of course, finally, is to promote international partnership. So from our perspective as a Trans-Saharan investment company, we are a private equity business development company that focuses on novel technology opportunities, especially surrounding technologies that drive the fourth industrial revolution, right? But also that serve a large base of the population. So for us, it's extremely important that we're able to leverage companies that can take these technologies and serve the population at large. One of such companies that we have is one called Migo, was called Minds.io. But using AI and blockchain, they have been able to democratize capital and get small lenders access to the capital that they never had the ability to get. They're today funding up to 70 million small businesses that are able to tap into that financial capacity and get their businesses running. And I think I was sharing with you that one of the things that I found so fascinating is when you look at banking, and we all know that banking is inherently risk averse, but then comparing that with a network like this, there have been no fail rates. So it tells us that these startups that are looking for access to capital tend to be extremely prudent about making sure that they pay that back. So for us, a landscape and environment that really focuses on big opportunities that involve data is where we focus in. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. And it brings up a great question for Dima and Jack is, is what are the types of AI companies that you're investing in or you're seeing getting investment? Is there anything sort of unique in terms of their characteristic to your region? Jack, do you want to comment on the types of investments?
Yeah, I think this is quite topical. Obviously, if you think about the industries that's important, Simon, on the African continent, if you think about financial inclusion, I think we've seen examples of some innovations, world-renowned innovations in terms of mobile money, in terms of M-Pesa, Safaricom, for instance. But there's, as a spin-off of that, there is companies like Jumo, for instance, that's building a mobile money marketplace and providing via feature phones an opportunity for just people that aren't banked to actually access, say, microloans or insurance products through their feature phones. So very innovative solutions to solve some of the problems that we have here. There's other examples like robotics in agriculture. So they are doing crop protection for your farm, and they're using AI and drone imagery to actually get the insights from tree and fruit and so forth. Cortex Logic, we actually started as an AI engine for business, and we've transformed the business into a scalable, ultra-personalized, AI-enabled wellness platform. Extremely excited about that. So that is more kind of a healthcare or a wellness focus. And we've identified an incredible opportunity to scale locally, and then you can take it through Africa and internationally after that as well. So that's another area. Then there's, I know, Data Profit. They are focusing on manufacturing. With Seasoned Systems, my previous business, we also did quite a bit of work in minerals, metals, mining, and manufacturing. And there, the use cases is really around process optimization and predictive maintenance. I've also personally invested in a company called the Student Hub, which is providing personalized learning on a digital learning interaction platform. Very excited about that. It was actually now, they are actually going to a next round, which is, I think it will be announced soon. So that's another one. So it's education, healthcare, agriculture, manufacturing, financial services, I would say is some of the key ones.
Yeah, and that's quite a broad range of sectors. Dima, looking at Saudi Arabia and beyond, with your angel group, WomenSpark, what types of AI companies are you investing and seeing? And are there any that sort of particular to your region?
Well, not specifically for the angel network, actually, because we do not specify, we're technology agnostic. But what we see in the region mostly is definitely solutions for oil and gas that are becoming very interesting and also in demand. Also, we see agriculture being very, knowing the landscapes that Saudi has for palm trees and also for olives and rice. So agriculture is very big as well. So we see a lot of solutions when it comes to analytics for these big farms from a performance perspective. And then we see a big trend of AI when it comes to healthcare. Healthcare is, I think, the biggest industry we have after oil and gas when it comes to adopting AI solutions from a governmental and private sector. And I can say that insurance comes within the healthcare solutions as well. So we have a solution that actually we're dependent on it in COVID-19, which every citizen has to download this application to predict if you are in an environment that has any affected COVID cases. And this all works on AI, as well as predicting, of course, the symptoms and what are the solutions behind it. So I think these are the most three sectors that we see AI startups growing in these sectors. One sector that is starting to grow, but it's dominating, which is experience. We see experience when it comes to tourism, when it comes to culture, and also sports. So these three together, we see a lot of AI experience startups are growing in that sector as well.
Gotcha. And Ngozi, any further comments?
Oh, absolutely. So for us, I'll talk about from an investment perspective and also from a US perspective. So from an investment perspective, healthcare is huge, especially when it comes to diagnostics, looking at administrative workload reduction, looking at the pharmacology sector with respect to making sure that you have safe drugs, right? Tracking, and then also from a testing perspective, logistics and transportation, delivery time and product management tracking tools, real-time route optimization. I'm actually working on a project right now where that's literally what we're having to do to be able to deliver to our customer. The other thing is with respect to warehousing. So warehouse order and inventory systems, and of course, fintech, right? For us, fintech is extremely important, secure transactions, the idea of predictive and prescriptive analytics, for product customization, and also trend analytics. And if you look at the things I've kind of called out, you see that they have one thing in common: the ability to process data, because really data is the oxygen for AI. So anywhere that we see data in existence, that's where we try to focus on, and that's where we try to work with companies that can apply technology to those areas. When you look at the US, for example, the US is doing some really interesting things. So for example, there's this project that's called the FUN-GCAT, which is the Functional Genomic and Computational Assessment of Threats, where AI and machine learning based approaches are used to classify genetic sequence data, right? So that's one of the areas that some our companies are looking at. And also something that's called the DIVA, which I love that name, Deep Intermodal Video Analytics, that uses machine learning techniques to develop robust automatic activity to detect in streaming video. So giving you a lot more data out of video that is streamed. And then more recently, I'm sure most of you know about Cord-19, which was the open research data set, right? That really allowed for machine readable scholarly articles on coronavirus so that lots and lots of organizations could really participate there. On approval, some really exciting things have happened in the US. I'm sure you saw some of those announcements. Recently, the US approved a company called IDX Doctor. And for those of us who know some people who have suffered from a disease that is called retinopathy that really plagues diabetics victims, this can detect that in adults. So it's really fantastic. Another thing is a company that is called Imagen. I don't know, it was announced a little bit ago, and they created an AI-based software that is a computer-aided detection diagnosis software for wrist fractures. I remember a year ago, my son broke his finger, and the process that you go through for something that is so small is incredible. So being able to do this through AI and pinpoint that just makes it a lot easier. So we're seeing a lot of development around healthcare. I want to say one other thing that I think is extremely exciting, because this idea of food deserts and just being able to feed the population as it grows is incredible. The US believes that by 2030, that it will have to feed about 2 billion people. So have the ability to feed about 2 billion people. So NIFA, which is the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, is really working on accelerating using AI-related programs to really provide a multitude of agricultural production, sensor development, workforce development, just the whole ecosystem that allows for food, as well as activities like pest control and ecosystem management, adaptive groundwater and watershed models to be accessible by private sectors that can develop products around that. So these are some of the things
great.
that we're seeing, that we're excited about, and that we are going after.
Well, a lot to be excited there. I wanted to pick up on a few points there. I mean, one of the things that you said and many others said is sort of data is the oil of the 21st century, and data powers the AI models, the algorithms. And as we look across the sectors that we talked about, financial services, healthcare, pharmacology, logistics, education, agriculture, how do you think in your regions that you can compete with some of the bigger countries and the big tech companies in terms of getting access to can you get access to unique data sets, and how do you make sure you have big data sets so that your AI can be better than some of the big tech companies? And I think in Saudi you talked about some of the data trust that you were looking at between regions to help share and enlarge the data sets. Can you comment on that, Jim?
Well, one of the things that that Saudi started for that specific reason you have mentioned, which is creating the Data and AI Authority, which is an authority that looks at these data specifications and categorization and in all the country, and how these data sets are going to be unified throughout the country. So the collection of data becomes easier, and processing that data also in a faster methodology as well, identified methodology. Also, we see that consolidating data centers, especially for the government, to have G clouds within the country that will ease the access to that data rather than having the data exported outside the country. So these are some reasons or some actions that has been taken.
Great. And turning to Jack. No.
Yeah. Yeah. So sorry,
Jack,
Simon. Yeah, I think I'm not too worried about. I absolutely agree. Most of these deep learning techniques and reinforcement learning techniques, etc., requires significant data to train. But there's plenty of opportunities to create domain-specific, scalable platform businesses where you instrument, where you can create your own data as well, but where you also tap into other data sources. Just as an example, so with our scalable wellness platform that we've developed, we actually digitize the health risk assessments. So we immediately access our own data, generate our own data effectively. With our intelligent virtual assistant coach, every interaction with that platform, we capture all of that as well. Then we integrate into the wearable devices. That generates a ton of data as well. Then we integrate into the medical claims data of companies or the employee companies and so forth. So there's plenty of opportunities for specific domain-specific solutions where you can generate data. And it's not like Google or Facebook or any of the Chinese companies are really competing. There's actually no one competing. As a matter of fact, I haven't seen this type of solution worldwide. So I think this is just an example of solutions that one can create that can compete internationally as well. I think there's lots of examples like that. So obviously, if you want to compete with a Google and search and those type of things, that's going to be very difficult. So I would recommend domain-specific platform plays, and I think there's plenty there.
I agree with that. We're relatively short in time, so I'm going to go ask quite a few questions, but relatively short answers from the from the panelists here. One of the questions that came up earlier is what biggest actually growing AI companies in your areas? Is it skills? Is it access to funding? What are the major impediments to growth? Who wants to go on that one?
I think locally, just Africa, very briefly, I would say still access to funding in general. Just to give you an idea, we talked about this genomics opportunities, but there's incredible opportunity to create the African genomic solutions around the African genome. 1.3 billion people, 130 million people outside Africa. And we've actually mothballed that opportunity because we are focusing obviously now on the wellness, but we will probably look at that as well. But that is a very lucrative opportunity right there. And it's not that easy to get the funding. So I would say access to funding in general is definitely still an issue here.
I'll say quite honestly, just like any grand technology, AI is not exempt. Access to large capital outlays are required The nice thing here is that there's a lot of data that's available. But one thing I do want to mention is really the access to a workforce and a pipeline that can sustain this sector going forward. So I think that's really where the US has to do a lot of work, STEM promotion, vocational job training activities, pipeline development, pumping resources in those sectors to make sure that we will have the workforce of the future that can ensure that we scale around this technology that can be used in all kinds of applications.
One area of conversation is often focused on ethics and regulation of AI. Can you comment briefly on what is the broad approach to AI ethics and regulation in your territories? And do you think that's good or bad? Dima, do you want to start and briefly on this question?
Well, it is really on top of the agenda, honestly, especially with Saudi hosting the G20. AI ethics has been mentioned in the declaration of the Digital Economy Task Force for the G20. I think regionally, specifically in Saudi, it is something that is on top of mind today. They launched the national strategy for cybersecurity, actually, for Saudi, and a big portion of that was talking about ethics and cybercrime and so on. So I do think it's on top of agenda, but has any policies, actions have been done so far? We don't see it, but we think that it is going to happen very soon. I think that how the region looks at it from a collective perspective and not from a country perspective. I think that it should be a collective, an agreed voice that is highlighted and agreed on to these IT companies and especially social media providers and platforms.
Gotcha. Anybody else want to comment?
Just briefly, I would say sorry. Go for it.
Okay, so in the US, you have the Open Government Data Act, and it's law. And I think the key thing that it really does is that it provides this foundation for evidence-based policymaking, right? So it requires the federal agencies to publish the information online so that everybody gets to see this. I think this is one of the ways that we as citizens can police the federal government, and the federal government's information is out there for people to use, to criticize, to put information, to get back to them on what is right and what is acceptable. So that's one of the areas that I think that the government has done some solid work around ethics on.
We've adopted the European Union framework of trustworthy AI in terms of lawful, ethical, robust AI. I would say private sector and academia leading. And I have a bit of discussion on a national level, but not that much. And obviously at conferences, we talk about that. We try to implement this in our solutions as well. But that's basically on that level.
Got you. Sorry. Okay, and sort of wrapping up, there's a lot of talk about AI for good, and I think we've seen some examples you talked about here. AI can be used in the context of agriculture, healthcare, financial, democratizing access to service. What about some of the concerns about AI and safety, things like drones and use of AI in military situations or by terrorist situations? Any thoughts on how we as a society deal with that?
Yeah, I think that needs to be regulated. As a matter of fact, I was participating with the Future of Life Institute, and it was United Nations or African nations that was participating in that discussion. It was actually about 2 years ago. And Max Tegmark at MIT started the Future of Life Institute, and he's driving very much, well, their whole organization, everything around AI for good. But obviously we need to regulate those type of things. I would love to see AI being used to not just we want to obviously democratize AI, and I would love to see a super platform where the user is in control. We've got, say, personalized AI assistants that monetizes data and services for people in general, so that money can flow to the individual. So I think there's opportunities to use AI for good in that way. So we should steer away from lethal autonomous weapons and anything that prevents harm. We need visionary leadership to execute, to obviously be, and wisdom to execute in a proper way. And we can use the technology to serve us, not the other way around, not to make other people or just a few companies rich. I think there's incredible opportunity to help shape that better future for more people. And I'm quite excited about that. I'm also writing a book on that. And obviously with my companies and non-profit organizations, I'm trying to move in that area, in that direction, to create that AI for good.
Gotcha.
Also,
Excellent. Fortunately,
yes,
we've got about 1 minute. So Ngozi, very quickly, and then Dima.
I just
Literally
wanted
30
to say
seconds
that,
each.
I wanted to say that there is a platform called AI Next Generation. And I think what they're doing is incredible because they're creating AI technologies that counter contaminating training data, that modify algorithms and create adversarial inputs or exploit flaws in the AI system. So they're doing a counter to that, trying to detect those alien AI systems that are trying to create destructive forces and do the opposite by repairing those. So I think those kind of networks should be encouraged.
Fantastic. Okay, well, we've got a few. I'd like to, first of all, thank you, the panelists. There's so many interesting questions to explore here. There were questions about data, open source. There was one request, can we get a catalogue of the projects you mentioned, especially Ngozi, some fascinating projects. So thank you very much. We've got a few questions at this point, and thank you very much for your contributions.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much for the panel. Thank you for this great chair, Simon. And a lot of questions raised up in the chat. Perhaps you can follow up on some of them in the one-to-one or in the chat or also in the backstage. So for the audience, again, use the chat to communicate. Some of you can even answer the questions already in the chat. I saw that. This is brilliant. This is exactly what we want to see, how we exchange experience and knowledge. With that, I would like to come to our next speaker and actually chair of our next panel, Eric Schmid. But before I'm handing over to him to chair the panel, I have actually some questions to him because he would suit on the panel as well as chairing it. Eric Schmid, he actually started selling Apple and IBM computers from his apartment during his business school. With these earnings of about 500K, he invested in a fintech startup in the Silicon Valley before he was 30. The company, Cat Software, did an IPO at NASDAQ back in 1995. His VC investors were Henry McCain's and Andy Weichleaf, who were founders of the Greylock and Benchmark Capital. In Switzerland, Eric was seed investor in Frontify that grew to 100 employees and raised over 20 million. He also had to pull the plug on many startups and investors who lost the money. This is one of the downsides. But what he also likes, besides navigating through the economy with a high velocity, he's also a passionate skier. He used to be in the ski team as a teenager in Switzerland and forced to race with 130K an hour, what he still does in Davos. Now, Eric, it's my pleasure to discuss with you two questions before I hand over to you to chair the panel. Thanks for being with us. Assume you would get a gift of $50 million to invest in 5 different AI startups. But the revenue is actually not for you. The revenue would be for your girls. And when they're going to be 18, how old are your girls? We can't hear you. Eric?
Eric, you're mute.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Hello, everybody. I'm very excited to be here and talk about the future of AI. My girls are 2 and 6 years old.
Okay, so let's take the older one. Huh? Let's talk about the next 14 years. How and where would you invest 50 million that you just got with the responsibility that they're going to have the revenue once they're 18?
Thank you, Dalit. Well, this is a tricky question. First of all, you know, I just recently, my daughters owned an ETF on Swiss SMI, and the other daughter owned Nestle shares in their custody accounts. And the stock was not going anywhere. So I recently, after the pandemic, the end of April, I decided, you know, forget it. I'm buying Apple. So I bought Apple for the girls, and Apple is up, was up like 80% in the last couple of months. I think it's now up about 60% since April. But we're talking now here about venture capital investments and startup investments. So I think we need to differentiate between, you know, if you have your own money or if you have other people's money. In this case, I understand you properly, Dalit, this is about my own money. So someone's going to give me, I win 50 million to play around with, and you know, I can't buy a big house with it, so I need to invest it in startups or buy equity of startups. So the question is probably also, you know, would you invest in AI startups, and what kind of AI startups, or what kind of investments would I do in general? What's the question?
Yeah, how and where would you invest in AI startups?
Okay, so we're talking about it has to be invested in AI.
Definitely. This is where my heart is beating.
Yes. Well, first of all, nowadays, there's a lot of startups that, or let's say there's a lot of founders that can't raise any money, and they write business plans and make slides for investors. And what we've seen a lot is that every founder, or many founders, not every, or some founders, they just insert the word AI in their business plans and in their slides. And there's lots and lots of business plans that go around that categorize an AI. And you will see later with Penny Schiffer that has a platform that actually analyzes these startups. You can differentiate, but let's say, in general, I believe for every investment that I've done and that I've evaluated, there's 5 criteria from my point of view. Number one, it's got to be a growing market and a large market. Number two, it's got to be a management team that can get the job done. So you need to get some real rock star people that have maybe done it before. 3, the product has to be really a brilliant idea, something that is really, really something special, and that is going to sustain over time. And then we also have the competitive advantages. So the company needs to be positioned, have those competitive, sustainable advantages, and last but not least, you know, it's got to be a reasonable price per share. So you can look at, you know, all these criteria, and it will just be too expensive. So for example, I had a platform called Cedar together with Thomas Dübendorfer, who was speaking earlier, running the panel earlier. And we and 2 other entrepreneurs, we looked at 200 startups in the Zurich area and made 10 term sheets. So we made an offer to invest, to back 10 founders. But ultimately, we just ended up investing in too, because many other investors came. I mean, we were angels. We invested our own money, and there's many other people that invested other people's money that would just pay twice the price that we would pay. So we didn't invest in those. So I would still keep those criteria, no matter if it's AI or any other market.
Great, thanks a lot. I actually would have another question, but I got another question from the audience, so I will forward it to you. How can we create incentives to redirect AI investments to really helpful AI-powered application, like AI for good application and so on? Is this something you can take on?
Well, sure. Let me understand the question correctly.
I actually send it to our chat, so you can read it. It's probably easier. This is the advantage of technology, so we can still share those questions.
Could you just repeat the part of the? It was about.
It's how can we create incentives to redirect AI investments to really helpful AI-powered application. So it goes towards the AI for good applications.
Okay, well, I understand this question so that AI is doing something good for the world. Is that right?
Yes.
I think there is a lot of people that think that AI is replacing human labor, and there will be robots for everything. But if you look, for example, at an iPhone, most of the iPhone is manufactured manually, even though Apple is one of the biggest investors in AI and robotics. They still do those manually. And so I think that in our daily life, it's just important that we work within the boundaries of certain rules and compliance, and balance the benefits of the technology against the social benefits for the society.
Okay, thanks. So my last question would be, is AI more of a buzzword, or is the heart of does it belong to the heart of your investment thesis?
Well, I think that AI is quite a buzzword. If we look at the past, like 15 years ago, people were called statisticians, and then later they renamed themselves as machine learners. And after being machine learners, they said, "Oh no, this sounds boring. Let me be an AI practitioner." But I think besides all this hype, there's really some real things are going on, and the first thing is the availability of compute scale, which is growing tremendously. Then we have very, very low cost for the computing, and most recently there's a huge amount of available data, especially corporations that have so much data, and also there is a significant algorithm development that helps. So I believe that today AI is not a buzzword, so there is a lot of opportunity in this market.
Thanks a lot. So with that, I will now introduce the other panelists, and it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Penny Schiffer. Eric mentioned her before already. She's a venture capitalist, investor turned entrepreneur, and a passionate about making venture capital more successful with data. Thanks for being with us, Penny. With Penny, we have Matthias Zwingli. Matthias is working as an ecosystem builder on the nexus of startups, investors, and multinationals in digital Switzerland. He's a business angel, has his podcast, he's a podcast host, and this I like very much, he's an addicted kitesurfer. With Penny and Matthias, we do have also Daniel Böhi. Daniel Böhi has a vast experience in the food industry in the fast-moving consumer goods. He's a strategic and visionary leader, skilled in leading multi-million-dollar organization, including 10 years in mid-cap emerging markets private equity funds. Having an entrepreneurial spirit, he is always willing to take risk, calculated risk, while consistently developing corporate strategy, including customer segmentation and product and market strategy. And last but not least, I'm very happy to have Alex Fries with us on stage. Thanks for being with us, Alex. Alex, he is a venture capitalist and serial high-tech entrepreneur, sits in multiple boards of directors in Switzerland as well as in the US. He's also the first successful founder of a Swiss beverage company to penetrate the US markets. I guess this wasn't really easy. And what I really liked about what you shared with us, that using zero AI, he drove store by store and tried to convince purchase manager to sell his water. We will probably hear a little bit more about that. Thanks for being with us again, Alex. And I'm going to hand over to Eric, who is chairing this great panel. Please use the chat to put there your questions.
Again, hello everybody. Very excited to be in this panel with you. I think this is about the future and the way forward in AI investments. But let's go quickly into the past, and maybe we can just quickly go through and you talk about your last AI investments and what the company is doing. Alex, maybe you want to take this?
Yes. Can you hear me well? Okay, great. So, I'm sorry. So as Eric mentioned, I'm a partner at Alpana Ventures, which is a Swiss and American fund. I'm sitting actually right now in Silicon Valley. It's early morning and I didn't have any coffee because we ran out. So excuse my sleepiness. So AI, the last investment we have done is AI company based out of in France, whom I met here in Silicon Valley while they were doing their rounds looking for investors. And it's a French company with over 20 data scientists. And what they do is maritime applications. So they're gathering a lot of information about the oceans, currents, winds, ecosystem in general, anything that runs in the oceans, how it affects ports, and then they crunch all this data and they create separate applications based on what the customer may be interested in. So that's our last AI investment.
Thank you. Maybe Daniel, you have any involvement in AI startups and what are the companies doing?
Of investment. The last investment I did in an AI kind of based company is one in Toronto that is in pre-cooked meals for offices. And the other way is through the Founder Institute. So I'm a director of the Founders Institute here in Switzerland, and Founder Institute is one of the largest, if not the largest, pre-seed accelerator. So we help startups to really build their businesses and grow and kind of get funding and then get into the kind of stage of where they really track or get traction for the first time. And in that role, I'm really kind of a person that probably, I'm sorry to tell that openly to everyone, one of the most critical towards AI, because I've so far not really seen anything or very few really good cases where AI is being introduced in a proper or in a business model of the startups and founders that we've seen. So although I do think and do believe that there is a great opportunity, I'm very critical about how this technology is being used, applied, and implemented. And I've not really seen very much fantastic use cases, at least in the Founder Institute. And as well, what I'm seeing is that every founder that is kind of basing his case and his pitch on the technology AI in the last 6 months really is struggling to get funding. And we have in the Founder Institute as well done a number of VC funds that we set up. And out of all these VC funds, one was that really kind of was focusing on AI and had a huge issue to kind of get funding. So I do see the enthusiasm. On the other hand, I do see as well kind of reality not that easy for that technology in that sense.
Okay, so Daniel, just briefly, so you had I'm sure, dozens and many founders with AI business plans and ideas. Let me just say, why did you turn them down? What were like your three main reasons?
I mean, there's not three main reasons. There's just one main reason. It's just simply they did not come from a real understanding of what is the pain point problems or issues that they are about to solve. And they came with an idea, okay, this is a fantastic technology. There is something that is kind of like mystical AI, and that kind of opens everything. And we do have a lot of founders and a lot of people that come with this attitude, but then it really takes a hard work to really get them focused and narrow down what exactly is what it resolves. And that's when you kind of start to see the things pulling apart. So the main reason why we kind of turn down or do not kind of invest is because simply the people, the founders, don't really understand what kind of problem they're resolving with the AI. They might be great in the technology, but they don't have a real understanding of the market, of the industry, of the problem to be resolved, and how that really ties into a business model that is so unique and differentiating that it really creates money.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me, it was no ladies first. Penny, I'm sorry that it's your turn now. It's good to have you here. I remember 5 years ago, we were on a panel and you were on the other side at the VC arm of SwissCognitive. Now you're an entrepreneur. Tell us a little bit about Raized and what it's doing and how are you evaluating investments, especially AI investments.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So as you rightly said, it's really interesting to be on the other side of the table, because when you look at businesses from investor perspective, it's for sure you have a different perspective. And now we can see some of the challenges ourselves from how we build Raized as a company. And what we do here is we evaluate startups and startup investments. So we generate deal flow for our venture capitalists who are our customers, using advanced web search methodology and also data-driven evaluation of startups. So what we use here is actually much more simple than how we started initially. So I can also relate to this idea that you make things complex, you believe in the magic box, but later on, we now have a very clear idea of how we evaluate startups. For example, we look at the diversity of a founder team. So generally, founder teams who are more diverse tend to be also more successful when it comes to making it to the next level. or we look at the location and the past investors. So we are looking at things that are actually tangible and that can be put into a model, as opposed to the magic black box AI model that is sometimes promised to work. And we found over the course that there is some specifics in how you build an AI or data-driven startup that is not the same as a software startup. For example, some of the scalability that you can expect from software doesn't apply to when you work with data. The more data you aggregate, the more difficult it can become, because it's hard to acquire additional sources, and each source may not add that much value that you were hoping for. So actually, there can even be, the opposite of scale effect. And also, with some of the investments that I also coached, I saw that their margins were lower because they were doing a lot of consulting, which seems to be a model with many of those AI startups, but it's not the same valuations, or it doesn't reflect the same interest from VCs to invest into a more consulting business than a pure software driven business. And I think that's one of the reasons also why some of the AI founders are struggling to get funding, because they cannot fully compare themselves to the scalability of a pure software company.
Okay, that's very interesting. So I did a little bit of research, asked some friends. So from the biggest exits since 2013 in AI, we're talking, the 100 million plus exits. Most of them were horizontal plays where some rockstar researchers were going after some horizontal platform plays. How would your software identify a rockstar AI researcher?
The way we look at people, the models that we have built are not focusing on individuals alone. So we are at the moment looking at a set of criteria. So of course, the founder's education, the team composition is important. But then also we look at the sector of the startup, where the startup is located, and who has already invested. So we give an investor reputation score, and we look at how fast they were able to fundraise. So looking at the founder alone is probably not enough. And to find those signals, for sure, you can look at education and papers, and there's so much data you can aggregate, but it's kind of hard to do it in a meaningful, scalable way, and also to do it in a GDPR compliant way. If you focus on people's profiles and build heavy profiles, you can end up being in trouble.
Okay, thank you. Now, last but not least, Matthias, well, you have been introduced, and could you tell us a little bit more about the Swiss startup market, the size, how much of it is AI, and how does it compare with the US? And what's also very interesting now that we had the COVID and the pandemic, the black swan, how did it affect investments Q1, Q2? I mean, Q3, we don't have the numbers yet. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Pleasure. So thanks first to be the panel, and happy to discuss it a bit. So I mean, if we look at the Swiss ecosystem compared to startups in AI, we have around 2,160 startups, and roughly 276 are AI and machine learning focused. So you have like 12% in this area. And I mean, last year we had around 2.3 billion investments. I mean, that was almost an 80% increase for Switzerland. So a great year. And then, of course, it's always interesting how we cope with COVID. So we looked at the numbers, and we looked at the first half of the year, and it was quite interesting. So if you looked at the financing rounds, we had around 105, which was a growth. But the volume of investment dropped to roughly 30%. So we had around 760 million invested in the first half year, but a short drop on that side. So I think you have a lot of companies that do machine learning and artificial intelligence, and I have to say I think there's a lot of great ones out there. I mean, Scandit, for example, a big fan of these guys. they raised 77 million in this half year. So that was one of the biggest investments done. And it is an AI and machine learning company. It's not just that, but they use it. But needless to say, I think if you look at Switzerland and the Swiss market, we're growing. There was a quick dip, I would say, in volume of investment, but it wasn't that hard. And reasons for that, I would say, it's just Switzerland is not, it's super niche and deep tech focused. So I think we're less risk, we're a little bit more resistant if it comes to a drop, I would say, since a lot of the players are really niche markets. And if you look at the trend now for the next quarter, we had quite big investments. The ones that we're missing were like the 3-digit million investments. But on that trend as well, I think we're in a good track. And COVID more or less affected the volume. So you see some resistance on the bigger cases. But overall, if you compare this to Europe, we did much better on that perspective. So our investment numbers increased. And when you look at Europe, they started to decrease. I think Switzerland is quite well set up and an incredible hub for machine learning and AI startups for sure.
So is Switzerland really the Silicon Valley for AI, or the AI Valley? Obviously, SwissCognitive is very much on the trend of that AI is a big move. How does it compare to the US, for example? What proportions are we talking here between Switzerland and California, for example?
Alex, I think you know the numbers for the US. So, I mean, we're still small on the Swiss side. We're still growing, but we never have the investment capacity of a Silicon Valley or Israel. I mean, they're around 6 to 7 billion. But I think the growth is incredible and the growth is good. You see a maturity in the Swiss startup ecosystem, but there's still a lot of potential. I mean, we're at 12% now of all the startups. ICT is increasing, but still a lot of upside there.
Okay, well, going back maybe to Alex, your venture fund, Alpana Ventures, invests globally, correct? You invest in both European, Swiss, and in US companies.
Yes, yes. So Western Europe and USA, correct. But mostly, the fund is invested in Europe. So.
Do you have how many of how does your portfolio look like? Is it like half US, half Europe, or?
No, it's so for the most part, I would say about 60% are Swiss startups that we invested in. Then we have another 25% in the USA, because sitting here in the US is obviously very hard to. You get bombarded every day with hundreds of potential deals. And it's very hard to say, look, I'm just here observing. So we did decide to invest up to 1/4 of the fund in US-based companies. And if you, most of you have been in Silicon Valley, at the end of the day, the founders are either Europeans or Asians. And so it splits 1/3 of each almost. And then we have another 10% or so, or a little bit more in European, throughout Europe, companies that, again, for the most part, we met here in the US. So that's kind of the composition of the fund.
Well, this is very interesting. I spent 20 years in Silicon Valley, and it was very difficult to bring. I had friends in Europe that had startups, and they would go and pitch to Valley VCs, and almost none of them was able to raise money. But what's very interesting is that you are out of the San Francisco Bay Area, and you are actually, your majority investments are in Europe or in Switzerland. This is a very interesting case. This must prove that there is some substance in the Swiss AI startup market. Okay, so maybe we'll go around the group again for looking forward for the future. I mean, there was a question from the audience earlier that I would maybe like to put around in this panel, which was, you know, what is like the biggest effect you think that you know, AI has on the day-to-day, could have on our day-to-day life? Who would like to take that?
I can go first otherwise. So
Sure.
I talked with and I thought that was quite interesting. So I had a talk with an Indian VC company that is solely investing in AI, and what their proposition was, because what you normally have in digital health tech startups, it's just getting more expensive. And what they try to achieve is that they put down the cost of living, education, health, and yeah, these three around under $100 a month. And I think that is a proposition that AI can really do, because you have vast amounts of data and you can make it cheaper. But I thought that for me is, I see a lot of possibility in the whole digital health space. You have a lot of data and you could actually make it more affordable and cheaper for a vast amount of people.
Okay. Have you heard, you know, I heard recently that Google put quite some money and effort into digital health using AI, and nothing has really come out so far. Everything could be in stealth mode still, but I haven't seen much coming out. But I agree with your point, Matthias. Penny.
Maybe I can add something to what you have just said about Google and putting money into AI. I mean, what Google is doing is they help to standardize the exchange of data in the healthcare space. And I just come from a discussion this afternoon around how the players in the Swiss healthcare system could have a better understanding and collaboration and make everything more efficient, like with the electronic patient dossier, for example. And they seem to struggle to align in a way that actually things are going to be implemented. And the discussion is not really moving forward. And now you have big players like Google, but also Amazon, Microsoft are also doing things here. And it may be the case that they are able to develop this standardization that can be the data, let's say, boost, so that we can see more applications, but the local players who don't embrace it cannot benefit from it. It's a bit like it has happened with the telcos. So for the telcos, it was also that they tried to protect their garden instead of jumping on the more complex or more data-driven communication ways, and they kind of lost the stake. And this may happen the same with such big platforms like Google too. But then it's not so much the AI piece, but it's much more the data exchange and the standardization that enables other business cases on top of it.
Okay, that makes sense. Another question maybe for the Founders Institute, that you must see hundreds and hundreds of founders that come to you, and entrepreneurs are always very important. Is there a difference between, you know, let's say we have 50 entrepreneurs coming to you in Switzerland and 50 entrepreneurs coming to you in Silicon Valley. What's the difference between the entrepreneurs? That's maybe for Alex and Daniel.
Well, that's an interesting question. Actually, we're just right now running a semester with Silicon Valley, Switzerland, and Israel. So we combined the three most innovative like ecosystems to run a class. And what I see kind of is very interesting. While Switzerland, the founders that come, they are very solid in technology. They really, really understand what they're talking about in terms of science, while the people in Silicon Valley sometimes are a little bit weak on that. But they in Silicon Valley are extremely good in terms on the market side and understanding the use case and how to address certain pain points in order to really create a scalable business model. And their way of thinking and their willingness to take risks and their appetite and their self-confidence to really kind of impact the world in a certain way is unprecedented. That you don't find in Switzerland. In Switzerland, people are less confident. You do see that they're kind of more risk averse, and we do see it now in the last couple of months now as well with this entire COVID situation, where people are not that much trying to risk to get into entrepreneurship, but they're kind of staying on the sidelines, sticking to their job in SMEs or corporates, instead of kind of really stepping up and putting themselves on the line and building the businesses that they actually want to build. So that's a kind of a cultural difference that you see. The other things that I really see, and that's very typical for Founder Institute, we always say globalize Silicon Valley. By that, we don't mean actually the technology, but we mean the mindset. Because in Silicon Valley, whenever you knock a door, somebody will open, give you an answer, and tell you where to go. In Switzerland, it's a little bit more kind of your gain is my loss. And this difference in terms of thinking is there in Silicon Valley is your gain is my gain. And these are subtle, small differences in culture of the founders and entrepreneurs. They are vanishing because people are mixing and becoming more diverse in terms of how and people work together. But it still is prevailing in the way how they present their business cases and what ambitions they want to put behind.
Okay. So let's say in
agree.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Alex.
100%. And the difference, just like what Daniel said, are speed, quality versus quantity, and risk factor. So that's the three words that describe one side, the US versus Switzerland. And we experienced it even further after putting money into each company. We put money in US startups and Swiss startups, and the US startups for the most part already have valuations over 100 million and 60 employees and so on. And on the Swiss side, after 5 years, you're still trying to make 3-4 million, and they have 10 employees. So it's that carefulness on one side versus the other. So what we do at Alpana is something that Daniel mentioned. We invest in European tech, Swiss tech, and we combined, we have them combine their mentalities with the Americans by creating a bridge to the US. And then we combine the team. So we hire chief sales officers, chief marketing officers. We bring board members from the US. And at some point, we also mix the investors. So we have US and European investors putting money in the same companies. And that creates a little clash of cultures initially, but at some point they meet in the middle, and it's the best combination you can have. So we have great technology mentality with the best sales and marketing mentality together. So that's our model, and it works. I think it works very well.
So you're actually putting some kind of the shortcomings of the Swiss founders. You put them in some kind of a boot camp and bring them to the Bay Area and let them get excited with other CEOs, etc., and as a result, scale your startups faster.
No, I mean, we do that anyway, but it goes further. We have them hired full-time, the chief sales or chief marketing officer in the US. So we want US person to be part of the company full-time and at all levels, board level, investors, and operational.
Is that something that your system would pick up, Penny? Because it looked like...
Yes, it would. So it's really about the diversity of the team that it doesn't make sense, let's say, to have 5 engineers from ETH start a company with no sales mentality, no sales skills, all the same guys. These kind of companies have a hard time, and I can fully agree with Alex, on how you look for teams that have diverse skills, and it's one of the indicators that we calculate is how diverse is the team, not only in terms of let's say gender, for example, but also work history and therefore the qualifications that the founders bring. Yeah.
Do you think it's possible to scale a startup like in a small little town in Switzerland, like let's say St.Gallen or Lugano, or should they be in Zurich or Lausanne, Geneva, where the big universities are?
Yeah, so we have tested and we built a criteria to assess the location of the startup and see how well this is or how this is related to them being able to make it from C to Series A. So our prediction model that we apply predicts how well the startup can make it from one financing round to the next one. And one of the things we look at is the location. So we have given 5 layers, like let's say from remote location is a 1 to super hub is a 5, and then Silicon Valley obviously has a 6. So it's out of competition, or it's another league even. And we could demonstrate very well that it's harder for startups that are in a very remote location without the ecosystem, without the advisors, without the people you can knock at the door, like Alex said, to mature in the same speed and to the same level than the companies who are actually part of an ecosystem. I'm not sure nowadays how well you have to actually sit in that location, because we see more teams now that also work in a fully distributed way. So as long as you can tap into these kind of resources, it may help. But traditionally, before COVID, it used to be of importance to actually mingle and be there and network with the people who have more experience, who can open doors, who can kick your butt in a way when you are overlooking opportunities or focus too much on technology and too little on your clients.
Okay, let's go on a global basis now that since we have many viewers from all over the world. And let's look at investments. So for example, Alex, I'm sure you have some term sheets out of companies that you're about to invest with your fund and that you're doing the due diligence. Could you tell us a little bit more where the global opportunities are? You talked about Europe and obviously the US. I've heard something about Israel from the Founders Institute. So could we talk a little bit more about the global opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, we focus mostly on the Western European and US markets. The beauty about sitting here in Silicon Valley is that most Asian entrepreneurs and Europeans and the entire world basically comes over here, or used to before COVID, to look for capital or look for talent or look for M&A. So that was pre-COVID the case to come here for. Globally, I mean, we don't invest in Asia, so our funds are not large enough to do that. But I can see here US-based funds more and more opening offices in obviously China and India, and they have fully subsidiaries. India coming up very strongly. So Sequoia, Lightspeed, all these well-known funds already have full teams there. And Europe made quite a good impression here in Silicon Valley in the last few years. So a lot of VCs here as well are looking toward Western Europe. You may have Sequoia just opened the first outside office in the Western world in London. So that's one step closer to Western Europe. But I couldn't speak to you about what's happening exactly in Asia or not.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the COVID situation. For example, Can you travel to Switzerland right now, Alex?
No, I can't. I mean, I could, but I would have to quarantine for 10 days when I arrive. So I'm not going to do that.
That's been going on since when?
That's about 2 months now since the EU implemented that law, and Switzerland follow up. But yeah, I mean, I could go to Germany and take a car and sneak in, but I'm not going to do that.
Does it make your strategy with hiring, you know, people in the US and in Switzerland and in other countries, does these COVID quarantine regulations make it more difficult for you, or does the Zoom solve everything?
Yeah, it basically what COVID did is we have many Swiss companies in the portfolio that want to come and open a subsidiary here in the US and start working the US market, and that has been all delayed. So that's the biggest issue, I would say. And otherwise, me not being able to go to Switzerland it's a pain too, because I want to meet the companies and sit down with them and give them advice, and that's not happening, at least in person.
What are your expectations for the future? When is this going to stop? Or how has it changed your investment strategy? Is your investment strategy been adjusted because of the COVID regarding this geographic issue?
No, I mean, we the last 3 investments have all been Swiss based, and I have my partners in Geneva that they take care of, you know, anything that they may need there. But our last to become investment, so we haven't sent the check yet. It's a Swiss startup, and I want 2 Silicon Valley based funds to co-invest with us. So investments are still happening, and these 2 funds, even though they have met the CEO in the past, they didn't have to travel, or they are investing actually in a Swiss startup from here during COVID, which is, I think, good.
Matthias, what are the numbers saying? Do you see the COVID in any of your statistics?
Well, as mentioned, I think you have a drop in the volume of the investment, but so far Switzerland is still resilient, and I believe, I mean, there's stress in the market, so you will feel it somehow, but so far so good. Maybe a quick intro to the discussion before. So we actually looked at how long it takes to have an exit, and Israel is at 8.7 years and Switzerland is at 11 years. So you see there's definitely a faster pace in the market on that side. I think, as mentioned, the Swiss are a little bit more cautious to not oversell themselves. But I mean, it's gonna stay. COVID is gonna stay. It's not gonna go away anytime soon. So I think we have to adapt, and I think we're getting more digital and more global, and everything is gonna change a bit how we do investments and how we work with each other.
Penny, any last comments on COVID or anything else?
Actually, we noticed that it's harder for VCs to meet founders in a face-to-face way, which is actually a good thing for our platform, because it has become much more natural to look for deal flow online. So we see demand from investors who want to find startups earlier and know that they cannot go to all these events because they are not happening. So for Raized, for our platform, it has really helped us that this is not happening right now. And for founders, it has made it much easier to reach out to investors globally. That's actually maybe why some of the local events are not that let's say, popular anymore. Because if you can talk to investors in London, in the US, like almost everywhere, why would you only go and pitch to the local community?
Thank you. Daniel, you get the last word.
Thank you. So I totally agree with Penny. Actually, we're currently setting up a VC fund, early stage VC fund for preventive health. And within the Founder Institute, of course, reaching out globally, we, with this entire COVID situation and going through Zoom and so on, we don't notice or don't witness any kind of this really limitations. Actually, I exactly see a benefit out of that. People are reaching out from all over the place, and that makes it far more interesting and richer to really get in touch with people from Singapore, from Asia, from Africa, from all over the place. Many of them exactly with AI background. And so in our review and within the Founder Institute and our venture fund that we're setting up, that makes it actually quite easy and far more richer because we're all in one system, and by that the deal flow becomes easier. So for us, it's not a disadvantage. We see a picking up of the opportunities in that sense. But I agree with Penny, kind of just in a very local area, that might really be affecting.
Okay, thank you. Well, just my last comment on this, give me 30 seconds, sorry. I think it's very difficult for founders to raise money on Zoom. So I go back to the 50 million question before, I would probably not write this $50 million check to someone who I could just meet on Zoom. And I remember going up and down Palm Hill Road to Greylock and to some of these big VCs, and meeting in person was just so important. And we were always so afraid of having to meet these VCs and figure out what we're going to wear and what we're going to say, etc. So I think that COVID makes it very difficult. But last but not least, I just wanted to mention that we're having a nightcap drinks event today at the Prime Tower in Zurich on the 36th floor. So if anyone who is online right now would like to meet others in person, this is possible. Just send me or delete an email. Thank you.
Eric, and yeah, it would be actually cool to have a huge screen there to get some people virtually to our personal drinks. And yes, indeed, it is a very important point that we have the possibility to get in touch in person. And I absolutely agree with you guys. On the other hand, I also absolutely agree, especially what Daniel and Penny just mentioned, that now you can reach actually the global market, you can pitch globally. And I think one of the great benefits that we can take now is really to put together the different DNAs. We have heard a lot about Israel, about the US, about Switzerland, about the rest of the world. And I think the best what we can do is to have diverse team. Doesn't matter whether it's on the investment VC side or on the startup side. I think the most important message is whether we can travel or not, we still should invest into the future. We have to support those startups, and at the end of the day, they need money. So with that, I would really love to say, whoever is willing to invest and put this ecosystem forward, speed it up, and make sure that our future generation gonna benefit from it, start to invest. Thanks a lot, Penny, Daniel, Matthias, and Eric. Thanks a lot to all of you. Alex from the US, I hope you can grab a coffee now. Sorry for that. Thanks a lot. And with that, I would like to hand over to our next keynote speaker, Ngozi Bell. She was on the panel before, but still, for those who just jumped in later, I would like to introduce Ngozi again. She's conducted research on spectral analysis on deep sea communication funded by the US Navy and has more than 25 years of industry experience from environmental engineering to semiconductor engineering, from telecommunication to venture capital, from the public sector to private equity to entrepreneurship, spanning 4 continents and a cumulative of 1 billion business oversight. She also has been in academia teaching physics and management and was an appointee in the administration of President Obama working with small businesses. Ngozi, it's my great pleasure to have you on stage again.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Fantastic. So first, I just want to say thank you to the amazing SwissCognitive. I want to do a special shout out to Livia Speeds for all her great work. To you, of course, Dalit, and to Andy.
Thanks a
So
lot.
to start, thank you. So where I come from, when a family loses a child one time, twice, the next time they have one, that child gets that tells a story. A name like Ahamefula, translated, may my name or my impact or strength never be lost again. It is a prayer of sorts, hoping that this time that child stays. It is also believed that, like their name suggests, such children fight to stay and stay for good. So let's take a quick walk down AI memory lane to explore the many lives of AI and see if, like Ahamefula, it will stay this time for good. Artificial intelligence, or AI, was coined at a conference in 1956 at Dartmouth College, New Hampshire. The words artificial intelligence literally came from the perspective of inanimate objects coming to life. At that conference, Marvin Umansky, a cognitive scientist, and his colleagues believed that within a generation, just 10 years, that artificial intelligence will be a thing, fully emerged. Something inanimate will become like human. Well, the truth is, it didn't happen that fast. And governments, weary of spending, bailed. And between 1974 and 80, funding had stopped. AI withered into what was termed the first AI winter. As the 1980s rolled by, Britain, in pursuit of a competitive edge against the Japanese, pulled the AI card and resumed funding. Alas, that too did not last. As with the failure of general-purpose computers, government funding again disappeared, and between 87 and 93, AI was again laid to rest as another AI winter set in. Then, somewhat serendipitously, a rebirth of sorts in succession shows up. First, in 1997, IBM Deep Blue Computer defeats Russian chess grandmaster Garry Kasparov. Then in 2011, IBM's Watson beat the reigning Jeopardy champions Brad Rutter and Ken Jennings. And again in 2014, Chatbox tricked judges into thinking it was human, passing a Turing test. You see, what was special about these activities was that it seemed like AI was, metaphorically speaking, fighting to stay and be part of our lives for good. So the broad question before us today is this: if AI is here for good, should we place our bet with it? And how does it really help us? In other words, can a machine interact with a human in a way that benefits humanity naturally? For the past 10 years, many of us have been exposed to AI without knowing it. Gmail knows to put our spam in the spam folder. Google Home quickly returns a very appropriate answer to my question. In Gmail, the automatic response options continuously adapt to my personal writing style. All of that is AI at work for my benefit. The truth is, just about every time we're online, we're interacting with an AI that is studying our habits, predicting our actions, and making suggestions to us. That is how far AI has come. In a Pegasystems study a few years ago, 6,000 consumers asked if they had interacted with AI. 34% of them said yes, 34% said no, 32% were not sure. What was interesting is that the data showed that a staggering 84% of them had actually interacted with AI, essentially concluding that 50% of people experience AI without knowing it. You see, between 2005 to 2016, with the advent of big data analytics and other new concepts, AI applications increased exponentially, and the classes of AI, from machine learning to neural networks to deep learning, became more versatile in their use cases. AI is seamlessly blending into our lives. So while it's safe to say that AI has come to stay, is it worth your investment? And if so, where should you target? So let's size the AI prize by the numbers. According to a PwC report, by 2030, AI will make products and services better, contributing $15.7 trillion to the global economy. $1 trillion, by the way. By 2027, fueled by AI, the self-driving or autonomous vehicle market will reach $127 billion. By 2035, researchers expect AI systems to be 1/10 as smart as a human, By 2060, AI could start performing more tasks that humans do and doing them much better. Today, Google's processor, the Tensor Processing Unit, an AI accelerator, is the power inside its cloud computing servers. And this makes the Google universe, very intelligent. So following the logic of investing in growing sectors, we can conclude that AI is a worthy investment. With that established, where can you target your investments to make the best bets? So I just dropped a big name like Google. That also means Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, IBM, Facebook, Alibaba. Deep pockets are all into AI. That's a real big deal. So the real question is, what of you? What of us? Should we be in AI seeing that we don't necessarily have the deep pockets? The answer is absolutely yes. You see, AI, like any big impact technology, needs big stakes investments to create the foundation for rapid innovation. This requires the deep and broad pockets of government. So please permit me to use the US government as the backdrop to continue this part of the conversation. Simply put, by reviewing the US government's AI strategy in foundational research, in big data stockpiles, and spending, this can serve as a roadmap to the private sector to confidently place their investment bets, a strategy that will be valid in any stable economy. The US government's fundamental strategy for AI is consistent. Use federal dollars to clear the very expensive scientific hurdle of very early stage R&D investment. Establish the strategic stakeholders of government, public, private, academia, and international partner linkages. The goal being the creation of a sustained AI support and viable ecosystem for private sector investment that catapults innovation. Within this strategy, the private sector can find strategic investment opportunities. So here are some examples. In healthcare, the VA's National AI Institute will give US AI R&D community access to its data. The private sector can then create breakthrough solutions that will revolutionize society for the better. You see, the VA is the largest integrated healthcare system in the country and the largest genomic knowledge base in the world that is linked to its own healthcare information system. I'll give you one more example. In the financial sector, the US SEC is actively implementing machine learning algorithms to monitor and detect potential investment market misconduct. See, these are a few examples. There are countless AI investments by the US government that are opportunities for investment focus areas. So as we use AI to automate our cities and imbue the corporate and political worlds with intelligent machinery, the value of AI in our economy will drastically increase, both monetarily and in demand. Because of this, it is not only integral that we put our dollars or our currencies into artificial intelligence, but our hearts too. If we manage it all responsibly, we'll witness a large return on investment. So in conclusion, we know that data is the oxygen of AI, and money or capital is its fuel. So do two things: follow the data and follow the money. Find what your government or the big public consortiums are doing on both and get some of your roadmap for investment from that. So today, I bring you AI Hame Fula. AI is here for good. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Ngozi. It was very, very inspiring, very, very true. And I loved your words. And I would love actually to share those notes later on through our channels so people can read through that again.
Absolutely.
There is one question came from the audience. Do you think that COVID-19 would lead to the next AI winter?
Well, I don't think so. I see COVID from two perspectives, right? One is that it's giving countries and agency to really think about how do we deal with pandemics in the next generation? How do we leverage technologies to deal with pandemics in the next generation? So my hope is that all the minds that be the different ecosystems will come together to really develop cutting edge solutions that can anticipate and predict these kind of issues in the future. Now, in terms of what is happening, what is doing economically, that is certainly a challenge. But also we have to recognize that many opportunities now exist, right? See what we're doing. We're having a global conference, through a digital platform. These are opportunities. So I don't believe that it will lead to the next economic winter, but instead that it will create opportunities if managed properly. Now, I will say one thing with small businesses. I know that a lot of small businesses are suffering in this time, and that's why it's so important for nations to be innovative in their support for small businesses, create the right kind of foundations that will help them be successful and weather through the storm.
Ngozi, very true. I would sign those words. With that, unfortunately, time is running. Thanks a lot for being with us and sharing your thoughts. It was very valuable. Please, you can go to the backstage room, have more discussion. I saw there were some more questions, relevant questions, and you can discuss it with Ngozi directly or also reach out in a one-to-one. By that, thanks, and say hello to Kezwe. I hope he was looking at his mom again. Now we're coming to our last panel, and it's my great pleasure to introduce you to our panel chair, Thomas Dubendorfer, who is the president of SICTIC, the Swiss ICT Investors Club, the largest in Switzerland, the largest Switzerland-based Angels Investors Club that invested into more than 50 startups last year, 2019. Thomas helped to build up Google's engineering office in Zurich and more than 1,000 employees, and has co-founded 5 technology startups after he left Google. Thanks, Thomas, to chair the panel. With Thomas on the panel, we have Stephanie Schoß, who is a serial entrepreneur and currently in the field of psychology of AI. She is a HSG faculty member of the executive education, and she is a pilot. And what I really love about you, Stephanie, is when we two have our me time, and this reminds me to the last thing what you wrote. You are a passionate mother and a passionate wife, and I think this is one of the nicest things that you can say. Thanks for being with us, Stephanie. Then we have Fabian Westerheide, who is the founder of Raized.ai, with 10 guests in 2015. He started and scaled it up to 1,000 guests. And I can imagine that COVID was really tough. So I'm very happy to have you virtual with us because the physical events, unfortunately, are not able to be held. In 2014, he founded the first VC focused on AI, Asgard. Before he founded Wunschbrautkleid, what in German, or actually in English, is the favorite bridal dress. I think that would be the right, the right word for it. He built the largest marketplace in Europe, actually, for these wedding dresses. He was an early investor in Delivery Hero, which later did an IPO and entered the German DAX. Then we have with us Dov Bagera. Dov, born in Israel, he moved to Switzerland for 2 years, actually, only to join Sandoz, today's Novartis. But this was already 30 years ago, and he's still in Switzerland. So having an Israeli for such a long time in Switzerland, I think we're doing quite a good job here. Since then, Dov actually co-founded several companies in the 19th. He exited 6 through trade sales and 1 IPO on NASDAQ. He's actually a digital nomad. His companies were in Switzerland, Austria, Germany, Scandinavia, Slovakia, Côte d'Ivoire, and Cameroon. You haven't put Israel on it.
Yeah, right.
So obviously also in Israel. His latest activity is with a Swiss-Israeli startup in the AI sector, the RELE.AI. Next to his involvement with startup, Dov has a significant activities with NGOs and advancing the acceptance of medical cannabis. Last but not least, on the channel, we have Kamales Lardi. For those who've heard her at the beginning, and for those who missed her, I would like now to introduce Kamales again. And I started with a quote of Kamales. Technology is not a silver bullet solution. A clear value proposition should drive any transformation effort. This approach resonates well with many business leaders and has helped Kamales stand out in the digital space. Kamales is a bold and strategic thinker in digital and business transformation, with over 20 years of experience in the digital space with dynamic and current approaches to technology application in the business. Now listen to that, to those who didn't listen to that before. Back in the 1990s, Kamales was turned down at her first job interview as a technological assistant. And why? Because the interviewer actually thought that this job is too technical for a woman. But as you mentioned at the beginning of our event, it has an happy end, and you were able actually to change to another department where you found a great job and started your career there. Recently, Kamales has been awarded to the top 10 global thought leaders in digital transformation. So don't tell me that women are not accurate for a technical job. Thomas, it's my great pleasure to hand over to you the virtual panel. Enjoy the time, and thanks for being with us.
So welcome everybody. I'm really happy to be here. It has been an exciting conference so far. We touched on many interesting aspects of artificial intelligence, what it means for our lives, why it is interesting to invest or not, what the challenges are. I now have the pleasure to be on a panel as the moderator with very entrepreneurially experienced people. So they have seen the journey of startups, they've seen the journey of big corporates. They always try to look out for how we can actually really use these new technologies and go beyond the buzzword of AI. So I'm very happy to discuss with them two core questions in this panel. One core question is, if you are a CEO of a large corporate, is it the right time to invest into artificial intelligence now and to boost your company with that? Or maybe it's not the right time? So that's the first question we're going to look at for a company, whether it's the right time to invest for itself or not. The second question we're going to address is, if you are an investor, why is it the right time to do it now? And what are the caveats about that? So we're going to start with the question about, should a CEO invest in artificial intelligence? And for that, I want to bring up that I also had contact with some CEOs, and some of them said they're very afraid actually to touch artificial intelligence. Maybe they heard some rumors, or maybe there's other things there. So I would love to hear from my panelists, what could it be that some CEOs, even though it seems to be in everybody's mouth, still don't really want to attach artificial intelligence with their company name? So maybe Kamales, you can start and give your perspective on why CEOs are still somewhat too afraid to really touch AI. Please,
Thank you,
Kamales.
Thomas. And hello to everyone. Good evening. I think this is a very critical question at the moment, because what we're facing in this post-COVID environment is organizations really looking to conserve their funding, conserve their efforts, conserve the costs of the environment, and really trying to improve their business operations. So we've shifted from this kind of generate revenue, brand awareness environment or goals towards just a survival goal and cost reduction goals. And I think here investments in AI system can really be a beneficial solution. And we have to first pre-qualify by saying CEOs tend to think of, or many that I have spoken to tend to think of AI systems as these big, massive solutions, something that is extremely complex or difficult to implement, which can be true. But if you look at AI as in its entirety, the range or the spectrum of applications, there's so many different things that could be applied. So if we take a simple example of a customer journey analytics system, which allows you to input, for example, point of sale data in order to understand the customer journey. This could be a very simple application of AI that could produce very quick results and also be very beneficial in the current situation. So I think one of two things happens. Executives tend to think of AI systems as extremely complex, large, difficult systems to understand. And they tend to shy away from that, or they tend to think of it as a silver bullet solution, something that has to be, the solution to every business problem that they have, for example. So I think having a basic understanding for the spectrum of AI, where AI could be applied, that really could create a kind of benefit in the post-COVID environment for organizations.
Thanks, Kamales, for your thoughts. So basically, it might be about complexity, or it might be about not fully understanding what it means to have AI in your company. And I think it's true that it's really hard to explain what certain AI systems actually do. Some people claim once it's running, don't touch it as long as it works, which basically means it's doing something which is hard to explain. And of course, if you are the control freak as the CEO of a company, that's not a thing you want to have in the heart of your company, maybe. So yeah, controlling it and having high complexity might be reasons why you don't want to do it. Now, I guess Stephanie has different thoughts because she runs roundtables with CEOs of big corporates, thanks to her amazing network at the University of St.Gallen. I guess she has the opportunity to talk to the most amazing people in the world that make big decisions every day. And I hope you learned something from them that you could share with us. Please, Stephanie.
Yes, first, hi to everybody from my side as well. Thanks, Thomas, for the question. Well, I would say that I see a shift in the last 1 to 2 years from those who have started to adapt it and create new business models around AI based in their current environment, and those who still shy away from it because they don't know how to approach it, as Kamales said. I think in general, because you asked the question why they rather not invest in it, or what is the barriers. I think of course the typical CEOs of the global listed companies that I've been talking to, they have been hired for their job for a different reason, because they have experience and skill in their markets, and they are there to sustain a business and grow it linearly. And the question of how do you transform the entire industry, disrupt your business model, is kind of scary for them. So this is one thing. It's a mindset thing as well. So are you fresh in your mind, like Fabian, jumping into new opportunities? That's an entrepreneurial mindset that corporate CEOs are usually not don't exhibit so much. And then I also see a lot of doubts around their own mindset. They just cannot grasp it. What is it really? How does it improve gradually or radically my business? They feel they don't have the education, the skill, the capacity, and the bandwidth themselves, but also the business to incorporate it. And they are busy with their normal business. So rather stick to what you know and improve that. That's a couple of barriers that I have observed in our discussions.
Thanks, Stephanie, a lot for these thoughts. So to summarize that, it sounds like CEOs are here to manage a company and not to disrupt it. AI could disrupt it. It even could lead to new uncharted territories, which are hard to manage, which means additional risks. And a lot of CEOs maybe don't really like those risks. They rather want to prevent them or not even run into them. There are other good thoughts. Let's maybe look at what Dov sees. He has an interesting background, seeing different ecosystems grow, Switzerland, Europe, the world, and of course also Israel. Maybe he can tell a little bit about what he sees as potential reasons why a CEO thinks it's not the right moment to invest or even to be attached to artificial intelligence technologies right now.
Sure.
Please.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here tonight. It's, and certainly with such a honorable panel. I can reflect the ideas that I hear from many colleagues of mine, which are in the position of CEOs or chairman of companies. And it's the black box effect. There is nothing more threatening to any manager, and certainly to a senior manager, than to have in front of him a black box, and the black box contains something that he doesn't understand or she doesn't understand. And if I have something that I'm going to use for my company, I want to have it under control. I want to really understand what are the usages that it's going to influence. In principle, they expect technology to be something which is plug and play. You come, you buy it, you plug it in, it works. It's not the case. And in the moment they start to understand that it takes time, and it will actually put in place not the people that they believed are the most capable one, but probably they're going to see a shift in the management team. They're going to see that the more creative one, the one who understands where the artificial intelligence can bring them, are going to take actually the lead. Even if in the management position nothing is going to change, but in the reality the leadership is shifting. And that's something that is threatening the whole organization that they are building, that they are relying on. And it's also a matter of trust that suddenly it's not the people they have put themselves in, but new faces are popping up. The last factor that I feel that in the conversation that I had is that the difference between machine and human was very clear. The human are there to operate the machines. And the machine are going to be programmed, and they're going to get some parameters, and then they're going to function with those parameters. And suddenly, the interaction between the machine and the human is in a situation that you can hardly differentiate who is more in charge, the machine that is learning so quickly to adapt to the new data that it received, or the human who is collecting the data, analyzing the data, and assuming that the data should go into the machine. So we see a huge threat, the unknown, the black box, and once the black box is open, you can never put it back in place.
Thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts. So there seems to be a lot of reasons why people don't want to touch AI if they are in a managerial position and they don't want to have too many risks, which are hard to control. Now, maybe a question to Fabian. He is an entrepreneur and now as an investor into AI startups with a very exclusive focus on AI, I heard. Is actually artificial intelligence mature enough to be used by non-technology companies? I mean, we've seen it being used by tech companies, Google, Apple, Facebook, and so on. But many companies are not tech companies. So is AI mature enough to be used by non-tech companies? Can you give an example maybe? Please, Fabian.
Good questions. It depends, as usual. If the more digital your business model is, the more digital you are, the more likely you have to use AI. So every media company out there, yes, every information company out there, they all should use AI. We have in Europe not so many companies who are AI driven because most of them came from Silicon Valley or coming from China. Therefore, the original industry which uses AI the fastest, it's small. We have a lot of old economy, I call it, from chemistry to automotive to manufacturing, robotics, etc. And they have been slow with the whole digitalization. So for me, the AI discussion is not that relevant when you think they have to first start being digital, thinking in digital business models, thinking about data and storage and management and how to treat this, and then starting with analytics, and then starting with predictions, and then starting with automated systems, and then they maybe come to the point of AI. Nevertheless, I see it from all my portfolio companies, they have huge demand. So customers is not the bottleneck. It's more the culture on the customer side that they are too slow because it's always a buy or build decision. What I like to point out to the reason why don't we have so much AI at large companies, well, they avoid the risk, but it's also a question of, is AI their core business? Then they have to build it themselves. Like Siemens, for example, they have a very interesting approach to AI from top level to the bottom through all units. Or are you more, let's say, oil producing company, then you buy, you buy a product, an AI company either, or a service or a startup, or you're just becoming a client and use them as software as a service. But the mindset to use software as a service, that's not so much spread too.
Thanks for bringing this up. Maybe you can ask Kamales how she sees it. CEOs normally want to see a real value if they buy something. Now, with AI technologies or AI-driven systems, what is the real value that they actually bring to a company? Can you give me some example or just some use cases maybe, Kamales, please?
For sure. Thanks, Thomas. I think there were some great points as well mentioned by Fabian, basically around what type of industry it is and the digital maturity of the industry. And what I see in the market today is many companies are comfortable taking on AI in terms of decision making, so analytics for decision making, and they're comfortable going into that direction of utilizing AI systems. So a good example would be one client that I'm working with today. They've seen a tremendous influx of calls and online activity to their customer service channels based on just the entire physical environment, social distancing and quarantine and lockdown happening during COVID. So they've had to shift quite a lot of their workforce over towards the customer contact center type environment. And so this created a challenge for them, which was really around how do they manage the influx of calls, how do they manage the optimization of their staff, very quickly then transitioning into a remote environment where the staff could still take the call. And one of the key solutions that supported them in that environment was conversational AI systems that allowed them to take the customer calls and engage with customers in almost an empathetic way and allow the calls then to be routed to a human agent when and where necessary. So this would be one example of that. And we're seeing many, many different use cases where companies are getting real benefit and almost immediate return on their investment through applications of systems like this.
So actually those really interesting use cases do exist. Maybe Stephanie can share some more examples on when AI really brings actual value to the business and not just sounds like innovation or sounds great, but actually there's no real value or no long-term value.
Yeah, I think Fabian and Kamales made a perfect start into this exploration of what can AI really bring to a business. And I think just want to underline Fabian's point. If you're not the innovator, if that is not your core, start with the application, really practical applications, and the companies that think about where can I increase efficiency, customer experience, where would that actually help me, and then buy solutions as software as a service or whatever to start with making small steps in a proven product. So Thomas, you asked for some examples. Of course, you can think in non-tech industries, especially you can think about healthcare. So virtual nursing assistants, for example, that monitor patients, and even with big data analysis, you can create even a more personalized patient experience. Or another example from my field at the university, of course, everything these days is virtual, also virtual textbooks, but also virtual personalized tutors. And even with eye tracking movements and facial recognitions, they can see when the student gets tired, where they have learning deficits, and create a much more personalized interaction with the students. Just to name two other examples from non-tech industries.
So thanks for those examples. Maybe let's go into the startup world. Some of them try to sell into highly regulated businesses like banking, for example, wealth management or insurance or aerospace. Maybe Fabian can give us some examples of startups that actually manage to sell into those highly regulated industries. Or if there are none, then maybe there's good reasons why there are none. But give us an overview. Are there startups which successfully sell to these regulated industries or not, which use AI?
Again, where you have startups, you have AI companies. So it doesn't matter if it's AI or not, it's always a startup. It's always an underdog, sometimes not an experienced entrepreneur who's trying to, get into a huge corporation who has very long life cycles and takes a lot of time. So sure, they are companies like Ada Health, and they are in regulated markets, AI companies, but not more or less than another, because AI is not the bottleneck there. We don't have AI regulation currently, therefore it's not limiting us. We have data regulation, but still that's not the limit. And especially most market is B2B, and there we also have other thing. We don't have a lot of AI into B2C, and if there's B2C, it's often American or Chinese apps who are serving to us. It's either TikTok or Instagram who have our attention, but in the B2B market, way different approaches and different problems. So regulation is not a problem there. It's larger. Can you adapt to the life cycle and the iteration process with corporations? I have portfolio companies who need 18 months to close a contract. 18 months, that's a decade for a startup in terms. That's a whole funding round. They grow from 5 to 50 people in this time. And if they have to wait so long in B2B, that's way more challenging. But to give 3 fast examples where it works. So for example, I2X, they monitor customer support calls and give you instant feedback what you could say next to have to have a better sales or other approaches. So it listens to you, understands, and gives you feedback. Another example is MapQuest Industries. The AI helps robots to understand the environment like humans and work with them. Or for example, the company Aver, which is predicting crime in real time when it happens. So all of them have one in common. They support humans. They don't replace them. They don't say, oh, we have an AI now, less humans. No, it's always making a human more productive or more useful, like answering more calls, being better in quality, as a police force, better to know where to be, where to drive, where a crime could happen. So all these tools are out there helping humans to be better in their jobs.
So just a follow-up question which came from the audience. When you say it's hard to sell to regulated industries because they have slow sales cycles, not just because they're regulated, but just because they have very long sales cycles. Now, why don't more AI startups do B2C and sell straight to the consumer? It seems to be easier to use it there than doing B2B. Any reasons for that?
Okay, we are Europeans, most of us are. It's lost. I mean, for me, the B2C game is lost until Europe is regulating. Tell me one of the big main apps where we are, from Netflix to Google, etc., which is under European control. So how can I go into this game?
So we don't have track record in Europe to do B2C in a very highly scalable way?
It's too late. We missed the last 10 years.
Okay,
we didn't compete. The only chance is in the B2B sector.
Sure. Maybe coming to Kamales about the question, is it really good if you are in a regulated industry, like let's say banking, to go for AI solutions? Are they good enough to be used in these environments, or are they too much of a danger? Anything you could share with us, Kamales?
Yes. I think it really depends, though. So I always, we work quite a lot with organizations from regulated industries, so banking, pharma, and even insurances and so on, where what we do is really try to understand what the use case is, right? Where are you trying to apply this? And this comes down to a little bit about what Stephanie mentioned earlier in terms of trying to understand how it can be utilized and which area of the business it's going to have an impact on. And one thing we really try to do is focus on the value propositions. What are you trying to resolve within that organization? And is this technology really the right one to help you resolve that issue? And within banking, for example, fraud detection is really a very strong use case in terms of really trying to understand, utilizing AI agents to understand the landscape or the data, the processes, internal processes, and having kind of an early warning system to allow managers and allow leadership teams and even regulators to kind of almost foresee areas of weakness within the organization. So this is a very strong use case. We've also seen, I can give you a very interesting use case. There's a company called Soul Machines that develops, and I think if I'm not mistaken, they're Australian or New Zealand based, and they develop virtual assistants or AI-based assistants, and it's very humanistic. So you feel as if you're talking to a virtual agent, but it looks like a human being. The system has very empathetic or abilities to have empathetic conversations. And there's a bank in the Middle East that's actually hired one of these systems as their very first virtual employee. And this system has, up to 89% positive response rate for customers in terms of being able to resolve a customer customer questions. So these are very exciting use cases which we're seeing in regulated industries. So I think it really depends which area of the business you want to apply it and how it should be used and what that AI solution is. I wouldn't say it as a blanketed answer, yes to everything or no to everything. It really depends on the industry and the value proposition.
Okay, now the question, of course, comes up: if you want to use AI, should you build it yourself, or should you collaborate with a startup? And the audience has asked whether it's easier for big corporations to do that or for smaller corporations to do collaboration with AI startups. Maybe Dov can give us his perspective on collaboration of corporates, small and large, with AI startups.
I think the size of the corporation is secondary. I think it's the expectation of the management who starts the conversation. I will start with a very short anecdote which happened a few months ago. The company I invested, they asked me to join them for a meeting with a senior person in a very regulated industry. It was actually a bank, and they presented the product which allows the bank employees to use social messaging systems to communicate, and they claim that it's forbidden. They cannot allow it. And the conversation lasted longer than expected, and suddenly he pulled out his phone and said, "I'm sorry, but I have a meeting now with the audit committee." And the message for the audit committee came over WhatsApp. So that's about the reality and between regulated and what is happening in the organization. Now, to work with a large organization, the process is very long. There are a lot of risk assessments, there are a lot of regulation, and certainly there are different compliance issues. And nobody in any large organization is going to shortcut the compliance assumptions. Even if the compliance is not involved or the compliance doesn't limit a certain decision, the decision is always going to take that into consideration, which is prolonging. Now, smaller could be even companies, what they call in the German environment, the Mittelstand could be a company with even a couple of billion euros of turnover. In the Mittelstand, you will find usually an entrepreneur. You find the owner or people who have been empowered by the principal of the company to bring the changes. And there the processes are relatively short. The processes are usually followed up by the top management. And because they are followed up by the top management, there are always questions about the advance. And therefore, and you feel it that there is sometimes more pressure on the company to respond to the required adaptation. One thing is for sure, you can't do a deal with any of those companies without being ready to adapt your product to the specific needs. So none of the company we are negotiating with will say, great, that's the product we were waiting for, but please, we need those modifications, we need those adaptations, do that. And in the smaller companies, those adaptations are coming on the table very quickly.
Great. So definitely it has to be adopted. It's not one algorithm that solves all the problems, I guess. That's why it needs to be highly specific for the industry and also maybe even for the customer within the industry. Now let's just wrap up this first question by a very quick poll. If you think it's like a strong yes, if companies should invest into AI right now, or is it a weak yes, or is it a neutral, or is it rather a no? Let's maybe quickly go through our panelists and they could give their opinions on that. Maybe Kamales, what's your view? For a CEO, should they invest in AI right now? Yeah, we don't hear you right now. Now we do.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay. I think it depends on the digital maturity of the company and the availability of their data strategy. And you know, there's a lot of prerequisites to it. But if an organization is at that point where they could implement, I think, yes, the investment should go in that direction.
Okay, and Fabian?
I say,
right
sure,
time?
you have to invest. Also, if yes, you should invest. If you don't do it, I'm assuming American, Chinese, Israeli, and French competitor, they will all do it. Someone will do it. It's a global competition out there, and especially be surprised what's coming out of China. Later, Alibaba's running your business, and you didn't expect this. We have seen this before. Expect this, but also don't invest like just do it per se. So it's always depending on your business model, on your stage, on your size. There's always the right approach how to use AI the best way.
So it could be too late if you don't do it right now. Stephanie, do you share this opinion?
I do. I think thinking about it, that AI makes your business a global game, almost no matter what, a global and a data game, no matter which industry you're in. But I want to bring up another point. Think about that kind of investment you're doing. Maybe it's also an investment in educating your people, in creating a mindset shift, in educating them on the be, know, do level to go that step forward. And then think about where would it really benefit your business, and only do it yourself, invest hard dollars into building it your own, as Fabian said, if you think this is now your core or in the future your core. Otherwise, think about intelligent solutions that would augment your business.
Thanks for sharing that. And last one, Dov, what's your view? Should a CEO invest in AI right now?
The answer is very simple in my eyes. Yes, they should do it. They should do it sooner than later, as the players in the globally are doing it. Smaller players are entering that sector, and if you don't have these tools to use them, you are losing your market positioning very, very quickly.
Thanks for sharing this. So we still have a few minutes extra for touching on the question, should we invest as an investor into AI startups? And I'll just want to bring up a few key questions. First thing is, what type of AI startups are really hot right now and which ones should you not touch? Maybe Fabian can give us his view on that.
Okay, I would not touch everything which is like 3 years old. This is mainly communication, chatbots, anything NLP based there. I mean, that's 2014, 15, 16 were the hype years. We have huge demand for robotics, for industrial automation, for everything which is quality control. Wherever you have someone who's not academic, but had like an Ausbildung or Facharbeiter or something like this, they need support. They need everything where you already have machines and you want to automate. There I would go. And we don't have enough entrepreneurs who understand the real world problems. We have way too many entrepreneurs who come from business schools, like me, who fix problems. They think it's better mattresses or faster food, but they don't solve the real problems out there who everyone else has in the industries, in the B2B market.
Okay, let's maybe look at some hotspots. So where are the great AI startups in the world right now? Maybe Dov has an idea, some hotspots maybe then we can ask the others where they see hotspots. Which one would you pick to look for AI startups?
I would look, unfortunately, first of all, into the West Coast in the USA, a little bit into the area of Boston. And unfortunately, China is gearing up even faster than we thought. So Beijing and Shanghai, you can't skip those places, even if you would like to do that. And then we have a couple of hotspots. For sure, one of them is the large area of Tel Aviv. We have a little bit in Holland and Bavaria in Germany. I think if you have a person in each of those areas, we have covered probably the large majority of the activities in the world.
So Fabian, you're based in Germany. Is this a hotspot which is growing? Is it still young?
80% of all European AI companies are either based in Berlin, Paris, or London. So if you have these 3 spots in Europe, you have the main digital hubs, not where the clients are, where the startups are, the entrepreneurs, the funding, etc. Outside, I agree, it's Tel Aviv, it's Shanghai. So Europe has, I did a math, in the top 15, only 3 cities. London was in the top 10. Then it was Paris and Berlin with larger distance. So, but it's also correlating how mature is your ecosystem, how many fundings, like prior entrepreneurs. AI is not started by first-time entrepreneurs. AI is very often started by serial entrepreneurs, and you don't find them in random small places. They tend to be in the hubs like Silicon Valley.
Great. So maybe to wrap it up, Kamales can tell us where she sees the biggest disruptions with AI that are coming up, where everybody should watch out for, not just investors, I guess, but everybody that might be affected. Could you share your last thoughts on that before we wrap up the panel?
Yes, for sure, Thomas. So I'm a big fan of, and I'm an advocate for blockchain. And I think the combination technologies are where the future stands, where you would have AI systems combined with other types of technology. So blockchain, for example, could bring this secure data environment, audit trail for your data, the possibility for multiple stakeholders to share data on a single platform without having to trust each other, to create a trusted environment. So you have that security and accuracy of data. And if you combine that with the possibilities around AI, I think you can create some really massive transformative solutions. And also AI combination with, for me, obviously the industries that I look at on my personal level are healthcare and obviously around the business side, financial services and so on. But I think looking at these combination technologies and companies that are able to deliver solutions that combine these technologies, that's going to be very exciting in the future.
Thanks a lot. So we have to finish the panel as we will soon wrap up the whole event. Thanks a lot, everybody on the panel, for sharing your insights. I also learned a lot. It's always good if the moderator learns from the panelists. And I hope also the audience had some new insights. So with that, thanks everybody for participating in the panel. And I give over to Dalit.
Thanks a lot, Thomas. Thanks, Anyot, Steffi, Kamales, Ben, and Fabian. Great insights again. I think we could go on and on and on, but I'm actually happy to hear from everyone out there. We have to invest. We have to drive this forward. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce you to our last speaker. And before I'm introducing to you Denny, I want to say happy birthday, Denny. Mazal tov. It's great that you are with us today because, guys, he has, first of all, birthday. Second, he's running today his own event. He sits in New York, got up early to get everything done. So great virtual applause to you, Denny, to be with us. Denny started his career as a financial journalism and as an economist and was one of the first online financial journalists in Israel, working for Global Business Daily, bringing some prominent financial stories to Israel, like the coverage of the Enron story. In 2003, Denny founded DC Finance. Since its inception, the firm has grown to produce more than 30 conferences each year. Oh, I have a long way to go then. And attended by thousands of family offices, high net worth individuals, and institutional investors worldwide. DC Finance brings together over 1,000 families worldwide with over 300 billion asset under management and institutional investors with over 700 billion asset under management. So I'm very curious about your insights, Denny. And again, Mazal Tov, and thanks for being with us.
So it's good afternoon, good noon around here, and great to thank you for having me. So maybe I'll just speak a little bit about something. Whenever I speak at tech conferences, I'm the only guy who doesn't know what people talk about, but I do understand the world of family offices, and it's interesting because many tech companies, I think, don't know how to reach the family office space, and I think that perhaps is something I can give a few ideas about. So yeah, as you've mentioned, we grew to become one of the most prominent family office groups operating in the United States, in Canada, in Europe. We were in London, in Israel. Obviously, we came out of Israel, and soon the Emirates, given, of course, the latest peace agreement. And we were always the most tech-oriented group in the family office area because we came out of Israel and we thought, wait a minute, what edges do we have? So we understand that families love technology. So we were, not only does every conference we do in the world opens with a tech session, but we also hold sub-conferences dedicated just for technology and family offices with and at the premises of the world's leading legal firms. Baker McKenzie in London, Pepper Hamilton, Mofo, Clifford Chance, Reed Smith, and others in New York, Osler, Steichman, and others in Toronto and Canada. And many times you see how tech companies don't really know how to speak to family offices, how their mindset works, and they are a very important source of capital, right? Many people want to bypass the VCs and go directly to the families. Sometimes it's very wise, by the way. Sometimes it's not so. It really depends on the company. Definitely nowadays, I think some funds might be more careful, and family offices understand that they're liquid and there are opportunities out there. The valuations are better. They should check out what's going on. I think Larry Silverstein once said, "I never want to miss on a good recession." So in a way, that's the story. So maybe just a couple of tips from my end, being in this world for many, many years. First of all, I think it's important to understand why it's, I think is a great, what you want to do is actually meet the families themselves, not just the family office executives. A family office executives has an agenda, like an institutional investor, like a VC fund. I think it was one of the most famous companies from Israel, forgot the name for a second, that became a huge exit, and no fund invested in them because it wasn't in, they didn't tick the right boxes. And family, and when you think about it, let's say you're doing a 3D glasses, right? And you go to a family office, it's not there. They'll tell you, thank you, but no. If you go to that family's grandfather, mother, sister, daughter, and you'd say, you know what, I know you don't do that, but do me a favor, put these glasses on for just a minute. Let me just give you a glimpse of what's going on. You may get them excited, and then they'll say, you know what, I love what you're doing. I want my analyst to look at you. And then they'll give them an order, check these guys out. The only people on the planet that can make such a decision are the actual family members, less so the people that work for them that were given agendas and a plan of where to invest. So I think it's very important. Now, it's very hard to get to these people. Even your investment banker will not get to the actual family members. They're not going to talk to an investment banker, most of them. What do? You put an advertisement out there what do you do? So obviously in my space, I don't know why I picked that space, very hard one to work in. You're looking at the family office conferences and meetings in person that obviously now are not happening a lot, even though next week we do have a meeting at the World Trade Center. But in general, reaching out directly to the families, I think is the most important thing. I can tell you that unfortunately in our space, the family office world of conferences, there are many groups that claim to have family office in their name, but they don't. They may have families that have an office and have a family, but that's about as family office as you'll get. So do your due diligence. First of all, check out who sponsors those events. Do you recognize major families that everybody knows that speak there? That can give you the first impression of who you're dealing with. So beware, first of all, of many groups that claim to be family office groups. It's a nice wagon to jump on. They're making a lot of money because everybody want to reach the family offices. They can tell you you're reaching a family office, but you're not. And it's hard to check. It's not an institutional conference where people have a card and either it says you're a pension fund manager or not. These are private people. So it's easier to fool the companies like you guys that come from outside of the family office space. And once you're there, I have some videos that we made about what you do, when, at which time of the conference you speak, at which context, right? You want to speak at the right context as well. But maybe what I'll focus on is, just in a couple of words, what do you do when you reach family offices? First of all, the emotional issue. You're dealing with human beings, not investment machines. So many times things that you may have and you didn't think are important are important. If you have handicapped people, if you have some kind of an impact investing side to you, these are things that families care about, and they'll even invest in things that are even more dangerous. Large, pharmaceutical companies that it's a 10-year investment, but they'll do things that they care about because it's emotional. And these are things you want to stress. Don't be too technical. Right? I see a lot of companies where they give a very technical speech like they're speaking to a semiconductor VC. But no, of course, the families that invest in your space get it. But you want to get also those that are in general interested in technology and may not understand those fine details. You want to explain it in a nice way. You want to have the right pitch, right? Do your elevator pitch. I had a company that was once speaking at our Miami conference, and they came to me saying, listen, it wasn't good. Half of the people left, in the middle. And I said, you know what? You're lucky they didn't leave before. Because for 10 minutes, you've been standing on stage and nobody knows what it is you're doing. If that's an elevator pitch you just gave, then maybe that's an elevator that, in a building that got stuck in a thunderstorm for 40 minutes. You need to tell people what you do and summarize it nicely in 2-3 minutes in order for them to sit down and listen to what else you have to say, right? The entire world is running after them. So learn how to do the right pitch. Do not oversell. all of you guys in technology that likes to say, oh, let's see, we got 5 employees, each one worked 20 years. So we got 100 years of exposure and work. They don't buy those stories, right? Family offices, by the way, are very fast movers in the sense that they looked at opportunities when it was blockchain or opportunity zone in the US or cannabis. They get trends quickly. They don't fall for stupid white papers. I think, you know, if you look at blockchain, the majority that invested in blockchain are the masses, the common people, not the more sophisticated family offices that did invest in this space, but found, I think, the more interesting companies that were really serious, the Barry Silberts of the world. So do not oversell. Don't try to over-impress. They've seen everything. So take it easy. Do follow up. These people are very busy. Some of them invest. By the way, I've seen $1 billion family that put on $1 million only a year later. And I've seen people that work faster. It takes time to work in the family office space, but it's worth it. A lot of times we see families that end up sitting on the board of the companies, opening doors for them, inviting their friends. It's like a club. They're inviting their friends. Look, what a great investment I got, because they talk about it in dinners. They're so happy about it. So these are some of the ideas I can give you here. It's not always the entrepreneur that needs to do the presentation, right? Many times I see, like that company in Miami, the guy didn't only not get to the point after 10 minutes, he bored the hell out of everything that moves in that building that day. So just because you're the entrepreneur, it doesn't mean you're the one that should present. You know, I've seen entrepreneurs that should sit down in their basement, like I'm in mine, and not communicate with the world because they are having heavy accents, or they are slow, or they are so boring that they take any excitement out of what they do out. You need to excite people. You're telling a story. You need to look good. You need to do something that people would say, wow, I like this story. Maybe it's your marketing director that should be on the stage, not you. So think about that as well. I'm trying to see if there's anything else. You know, it's an entire world of how to reach family offices, but I'm just trying to give you in 10 minutes, you know, really a couple of ideas. Patience and follow-up I've mentioned. What's good? What would be a good tool for you to reach the families may change. Maybe you should do a private dinner, not a conference. Maybe you should speak at a conference. It depends on how well you present, what's your product, how sophisticated, how niche your product is. I believe that also you should pick the events or happenings where people come to listen to you. When we're doing an online session, which we are doing, I interview every week. Basically, an hour ago, I finished our online session with Paul Desmarais, one of the biggest families, Power Corp in Canada. Next week, we got Sarah Harrison family, one of the largest in the US. And then the next week, it's Katsimatidis, one of the, again, largest families, real estate in the United States. And in between, we have companies that present their opportunities. So here, there's no party, there's no yacht thing going on. They come to listen to you. They sit, you know, they're watching a screen and they listen to you. So it's very transparent. You want, as much as you can, to reach people that would come to listen to you, not because there's a cocktail party going on, but because your story is interesting. So it's way more complicated than that, I have to say. I'm just trying to summarize an entire thesis of how to reach the family office space. I think that in general, families, many tech companies have no clue of how to do that, right? Even when they do meet family offices at the end of the day. And again, I gave you just a couple of ideas. Family offices are the most liquid out there. They can make an investment decision like that, right? It's not an investment committee after investment committee. When you look at funds and when you look at institutional investors, these are human beings just like you guys that may find something interesting because you got excited about it. The emotional issue here is important. And they are the most liquid pools of capital that can act quickly, especially at times like COVID, when everybody else was sitting on the fence trying to figure out what's going on. They were already looking at you know, the ins and outs of the opportunities out there. They understand valuations may be better now. They understand there are great opportunities. So that's about what I can tell you coming from the world of the family office space. Technology is highly important for them. They love tech investments. And I hope I gave you guys some ideas.
Thanks a lot, Denny. Very, very inspiring. And I think we really realized what it means to be in with the whole energy and make sure that, first of all, the elevator pitch is not only short, it's also content related, not too techy, still sexy enough to make sure that you attract your counterpart. And what I really like to hear, and I think this is one thing that we need to take on our side, if I'm talking about the tech side, to make sure we're sending the right people. Everyone has its core competences. The one is developing, the other one is selling. Together, we make it much, much stronger. And obviously, it seems that there are people out there who love to invest, who are seeking for great opportunities to invest, even in the world of AI. We have seen some obstacles and a lot also for chances. We discussed a lot. At the end of the day, I think a lot relies on the DNA, on the culture of every single person, company, startup, or institution. Thanks a lot, Denny. It was very, very inspiring. And I would love to go on in the discussion in the coming days, weeks, and invite you again on stage. So now, enjoy your birthday. Mazal Tov again. And with that, I want to thank you, audience, out there supporting us again with great comments, bringing up great questions. Unfortunately, we weren't able to answer all of them, but we will take them with us and we will see how we can work on them and bring it back to you. Just listen to Denny. I need to have a very short elevator pitch now to resume this whole 3 hours. So I would like to mention 3 things. One is AI catapults innovation. The other one is we don't have to develop ourselves. We can do the first steps by using the applications and the technology ready out there. And the last thing is about us, the human being, about every single person out there. Although we have COVID, although we can't reach out to everyone personally, the advantage is, as Penny said, we have the global community we can pitch. And something else we're interested in, and I think, Stephanie, we will talk a little bit further on that, about the psychology and AI. It's always about the human and the machine together. Saying that, SwissCognitive, a platform that shares, connects, and especially unlocks the potential based on AI. We thank you for being with us. Why wait? Act now and share for success. We will rock it together. Stay healthy. Bye. And thanks to the team. Du bringst noch das